Let's go back to what is going on in the Middle East, and let's return to Michael, who is sitting here next to me in these moving images that we can see of Doha. If you're just joining us, there have been a number of explosions in the Qatari capital, Doha. Israel says it has targeted Hamas delegation, a Hamas negotiation delegation that were in Doha, and they've carried out airstrikes. Whether or not these airstrikes have been successful, we do not know yet. The IDF has not confirmed, but it certainly it has changed the situation in the Middle East in terms of relations between all of the countries there. We were just talking, Michael, about Doha, and of course, we remember that when President Trump did his grand tour of the Middle East back in May, not long after he came to power for a second term, of course, he visited Doha.
Yeah.
He visited and spent time with Al Thani, the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. How do you square that with him apparently giving the green light to Netanyahu today to bomb the capital?
Well, if that's true, it shows that the United States is very manipulable. I mean, it can be manipulated by Putin, it can be manipulated by Netanyahu. And that Trump seems to have approved, if he has, I'm still a bit sceptical about that until we get confirmation, but if he has approved it, he's approved something which is against his own interests in trying to generate a meaningful peace process. And I'll be interested to hear, when we get more details of this bombing, how extensive it was. We assume that nobody else was hurt, that no Qataris were hurt in this. If it was in the Qatar district of the city, I think it may have been in the residences where Hamas people were staying, not in any of the areas where they had their meetings, because there'd be other nationals involved, not least Qataris, but also Egyptians, potentially others, Americans as well. So I imagine that given that the Israelis are quite good at this sort of thing, they will have picked their moment very carefully, and I would expect that they have been accurate, and that what they've hit is only the Qatari leadership that they were aiming for. They are normally accurate, not always, but normally fairly accurate. If they have affected, wounded or killed any Qataris, that would make it even more astonishing, really. But I cannot fathom American approval for this in a way that just makes everything worse from America's point of view.
Let's just bring you an image that we have. We can show you the two people who were being targeted were two senior members of the Hamas negotiating team. One of them, Khalil al-Hayya, is one of those who we understand was the Israeli target, along with Jabarin and also. Michael, what can you tell us about these senior figures who would have been in Doha? We know that so many senior figures in Hamas have already been picked off by the Israelis. These would have initially been quite far down.
Yes, it was. I mean, Al-Hayya had he's had a sort of senior career, but he was effectively taking over from Ismail Haniyeh about 12 months ago. And the thing is that, these negotiators are not particularly close to what is actually going on in Gaza, because Yahya Sinwar was the big leader in Gaza, along with Mohammed Diaf, who was the military chief. And those were the two men who were really calling the shots. And when they were both taken out by the Israelis, it's obviously difficult for people like Al-Hayya to keep those contacts alive. So it wouldn't be clear how much. Not much authority that they had. They had authority, but one of the things that was coming out of the negotiations was that it was taking Hamas a lot longer to make up its mind on anything, because they didn't have such direct links to Hamas that exists in the Gaza Strip. And Hamas in the Gaza Strip has lost all of its military coherence, but it's still there. I mean, the Hamas leaders in Gaza are still capable of meeting or liaising together and making decisions. So they do make decisions, but it takes some time for their ideas to get through to Al-Hayya in Qatar.
And what about the decision to do this from Benjamin Netanyahu? I mean, obviously, we had this attack on the bus yesterday in Jerusalem, 6 dead, an awful attack, 6 dead, 12 injured. Benjamin Netanyahu down there on the scene very, very quickly. He was meant to be in court yesterday, of course. He's still facing corruption charges. Convenient timing to launch an attack this week also, isn't it, in those terms, in terms of domestic reaction inside Israel?
It was. And it's partly, I mean, it is the way Israel thinks about these things. The reaction is immediate. The retaliation is immediate. And so he said at the time, the Palestinians have done this and we'll surround the villages where we know they come from. He said, before he could possibly have known the identity of these people.
We only got confirmation about an hour ago that Hamas's military wing said that they were responsible for that yesterday.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is interesting because, Hamas, you could say, were very foolish in claiming responsibility, but they did claim responsibility. This operation, I'm sure, would have been in the works. The Israelis probably had an operation that could have gone at any time. Whether they decided to press the button as soon as Hamas declared their responsibility, or whether they had pressed the button beforehand, I suspect in this case they probably will have done so beforehand, and Hamas just happened to have admitted responsibility only an hour or two before. The timing will need to unravel that a little bit. I suspect the Israelis probably were thinking in these terms that after the bus incident, remember the bus incident yesterday was only the third incident in 2 years inside Israeli-occupied territories. There have been, 850 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since the 7th of October. But these bus bombings, there was one in Tel Aviv, there was one in Jerusalem last year and the year before. But this is that was only the third incident in 3 years. You would have expected there might have been more. So Israeli defense and security have been pretty good in those areas technically. And yesterday was obviously a big shock. So Israel's tendency to react immediately, I think that was a knee-jerk reaction. And my guess is that they would have had an operation to target Al-Haya and all of the delegation somewhere in Qatar when they knew they might be alone and not with foreign nationals. And they took the opportunity to do it.
As we've been talking, more news coming to us from Reuters saying that Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson says Israel's attack on Hamas officials in Qatar is a dangerous violation to international law. So echoing the words that we also heard from Qatar, actually, in the last half hour as well. No surprise that Iran has
We'll hear a lot
this
of
view.
that. Yeah, we're going to hear a lot of that. And remember, too, that today, the United Nations 80th General Assembly session opened. Very important, his symbolic one, the 80th anniversary of the first session of the General Assembly in 1945. Now, it opened today. It runs for quite a long time. And the big speeches are due on the 23rd. President Trump is due to address it. And I think the 24th, I think Macron, and then the 25th, Keir Starmer. So those are the big speeches. The question is, at what point in this General Assembly session do Britain and France and maybe other countries announce, jointly probably, that they're going to recognise a Palestinian state? And so the sort of condemnation that we're hearing now, I think we'll hear echoed in the statements that these countries are going to make sometime in the next week and a half about recognising the Palestinian state. And, of course, the Israelis will say, well, you're just helping the terrorists, you're aiding terrorism. What the British and French and others will say is, you've got to put a stop to this. We have to somehow bring the Palestinians to a point where they have a respectable political operation that you have got to get used to, that you, the Israelis, have got to learn to live with some form of proper Palestinian representation. You can't keep saying that they're all terrorists and behaving that way, even though, of course, Israel is under constant terrorist attack one way or another from Hamas and sometimes the Palestinian and the PLA sponsor Fatah terrorists. It does happen, but the Israelis make that the reason to treat everything as terrorism.
Right, lots more happening as you're talking the whole time, Michael. Let's just bring you a Sky source, a diplomatic source has spoken to Sky from the Qataris. So this is a direct quote to us. Hamas received the new proposal from us, the Qataris, which we obtained from Witkoff last week in Paris. The Prime Minister met with them yesterday. They decided to meet again today to discuss the proposal arriving from Turkey. However, as has happened before, the Israelis undermined hopes for peace, further prolonging the war and complicating efforts to bring back the hostages. So a bit more there, Michael, of the time frame about what was happening. So are the Qataris saying that these Hamas negotiators arrived in Doha today from Turkey? Is that your understanding?
Sounds like it, yeah. I don't know, but it sounds as if that was the case, because they've been coming and going from Turkey, but they're still having their meetings in Qatar. The Qatar government, as it were, got Hamas out of Qatar because it was getting too hot for them there, and Qatar was coming under too much pressure for hosting Hamas, as they have done for quite a long time. So Hamas basically, up sticks and went to Turkey, but they come back to Qatar in order to do their negotiations. And Qatar, I know I keep saying this, but the Qataris are very good at they're a tiny state. but they moderate different organisations. They're good at moderating and just being very patient and talking things through. And that's why, I mean, when President Trump visited Qatar, remember, I mean, he went to Saudi Arabia, which is what you would expect him to do. And then he went to Qatar, this tiny state, and he gave it, great respect by being there. And yet, in the first Trump administration, the Trump administration encouraged Saudi Arabia and the UAE to blockade Qatar. And Qatar was under a blockade under sort of 10 conditions that they had to observe. And the Qataris just ignored it and carried on. And the Qataris got through the blockade. They proved that they were stronger than this collective blockade back in the first Trump administration. And here was President Trump this time, in this administration, honouring the Qataris for their consistency and their ability to do this. So although they're a tiny state, a very rich state, of course, but although they're tiny, they do carry quite a lot of weight in the world of mediation. They're good at it.
While this is all going on, we've got the latest from the US Embassy in Doha. They have issued a shelter-in-place order for US citizens. This is the tweet. We have seen reports of missile strikes occurring in Doha. The US Embassy has instituted a shelter-in-place order for their facilities. US citizens are advised to shelter in place and monitor the US Embassy's social media for updates. Well, yes, it certainly will make things more tricky for US citizens in Doha, won't it? We're also hearing from an official spokesperson for the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Qatar. This is an official spokesman who has given a statement as well. Let's just bring you that. The state of Qatar strongly condemns the cowardly Israeli attack that targeted residential buildings. And that was something you'd said, Michael, that you thought they might be in the residential area, housing several members of the political bureau of Hamas in the Qatari capital, Doha. They're calling it a criminal assault. They say this criminal assault constitutes a blatant violation of all international laws and norms and poses a serious threat to the security and safety of Qataris and residents in Qatar. The ministry affirms that the security forces, civil defence and relevant authorities immediately began addressing the incident and taking necessary measures to contain its repercussions and ensure the safety of residents in surrounding areas. While the state of Qatar strongly condemns this assault, it confirms that it will not tolerate this reckless Israeli behaviour and the ongoing disruption of regional security, nor any act that targets its security and sovereignty. Investigations are underway at the highest level and further details will be announced as soon as they are available. Michael Clark is with me now, security and defence analyst. These are very strong diplomatic words, aren't they, Michael?
They are. I mean, coming from, as we keep saying, a tiny country directed at a very powerful country in relative terms, Israel, and also resounding in the United States, which is fundamental to all of these discussions. So here are the Qataris. They're not just expressing their outrage; they're expressing their anger as well. And going back to what we were saying a few minutes ago, it's hard to see that any dialogue is going to continue for the foreseeable future. It'll take some time to get dialogue back on track, I think, because this will take some getting over. It's an extrajudicial killing in a neutral third country, which is noted for its mediation ability, for its peacefulness, and its contribution to lots of good things in the Middle East, humanitarian operations, operations in Afghanistan, operations to help prisoner exchanges in the Ukrainian war. The Qataris, they often attract criticism that they're doing too many things at once, that they're a sort of young upstart trying to make a name for themselves. But actually, what they've done in recent years has been pretty constructive. And although they can't operate at the centre of big controversies or big conflicts, they operate around the fringes. They try and do the things that can be done, the things that are possible, the humanitarian things. And they're very good at thinking through the inventive ways of trying to relieve pressure and trying to create avenues for mediation on the assumption that only the big players can actually make the real differences, but small players can be very useful and very helpful, and that's what they are. And to have Hamas people, albeit a terrorist group with terrorist leaders, no question about that, but to have them targeted in a country like Qatar is significant escalation on Israel's part.
We were talking about the fact that President Trump had visited Doha back in the spring after he was elected. Another country that he visited was the United Arab Emirates, UAE. They have released a statement. A diplomatic advisor to their president says, "We stand with Qatar, condemning the treacherous Israeli attack that targeted it." So Iran and the UAE both standing squarely behind Qatar.
And you know, Jane, there aren't many issues on which the UAE would stand behind Qatar because there's a lot of rivalry. I mean, the UAE was leading that blockade I was talking about from 2016. That was really led by Qatar and Saudi Arabia. So it isn't often that the UAE really stands behind Qatar, but it's interesting that they do on this one.
Yeah, it is really, really interesting. It feels like the shifts in the sands are we're actually watching it happen in real time.
Yeah, I mean, what Israel may have provoked in this attack is hard to work out just at the moment. We'll see, you know, in the next 24 hours, I suppose, when the rest of the world reacts. But, I mean, you know, one understands Israeli thinking that, you know, we have to retaliate quickly, we have to be decisive, we have to show that atrocities like the bus shooting from yesterday doesn't go unpunished. That's the Israeli thinking. But the broader strategic thinking sometimes seems to be lacking. You know, what are you going to create if you do this? How bad will it get? I mean, how are you ratcheting up the tension when you could take a more nuanced view and think about it more carefully? That would be the West European way of doing it. But, of course, Israel doesn't think that way because it's a state that is surrounded by potentially hostile neighbours.
Yeah. I mean, what you don't want to do is get countries that potentially could be your enemies to unite behind you, do you?
No, and that's why, I mean, Israel has taken the opportunity, the dreadful opportunity of the 7th of October atrocities to say, we will take on our enemies. So we'll take on Hamas wherever they exist. So we take on Hamas in Gaza, we take on Hamas in Iran, we take on Hamas now in Qatar. Wherever we see them, we'll take on Hamas. We'll take on Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we'll take on the Houthis, if necessary, in Yemen. And we'll take on Iran. We will bomb Iran. They would never have done that unless they felt they had the backing of the United States. They wouldn't have done it in the Biden administration because they wouldn't have had the backing. But Trump has made it very clear that he supports what Israel thinks it needs to do to remake the Middle East in a way that will make Israel bigger, physically bigger, and more secure. And that's the first time since 1948, since the establishment of the State of Israel, that a United States president has really been thoroughly behind that aspiration.
Michael, thank you so much for all your analysis so far. Let's bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who joins us now from the White House. Mark, good to talk to you. So we've heard from Israel that there was a conversation between Israel and the United States before this attack went ahead, that apparently the US gave a green light. How significant is that?
Well, I'm just looking at Donald Trump's Truth Social feed, because that's usually where we hear from him first. Nothing at the moment on the events in Doha. He is here at the White House. He is due to appear on camera in the Oval Office at around 4 o'clock this afternoon. His press secretary, Caroline Levitt, is due to give a news conference, a regular news briefing at 1 o'clock this afternoon, so in a few hours' time. I'm struck by the fact that the Israelis are saying that they had notified the Americans before this strike. You would expect that to be the case, but it doesn't entirely align with the US Embassy in Qatar's statement on X, which says we have seen reports of missile strikes occurring in Doha. The sort of inference of the language used there is that they were somehow surprised by this. So we await clarity on the extent to which the Israelis did, in fact, inform the Americans on it. I've also been speaking to a Qatari diplomatic source here in Washington over the last 10 minutes, who has said the following to me. Says Hamas received the new proposal from us, that is the American-Israeli ceasefire proposal, which was obtained from Witkoff in Paris last week. Witkoff is the Trump's Middle East envoy. It goes on to say the Prime Minister met with them yesterday. They decided to meet again today to discuss the proposal arriving from Turkey. And then it concludes, and this is the key bit, however, as has happened before, the Israelis undermined hopes for peace, further prolonging the war and complicating efforts to bring the hostages back. Now from Qatar, from the Qatari government, to have a line like that is so directly critical of Israel is telling. Remember, the Qataris have been the mediators in all of this. They have been, yes, hosting the political wing of Hamas in Doha, but as part of a process to try and find common ground between Israel and Hamas to bring around a form of peace. And so to that end, hitherto, the Qataris have not, in quite that language, been quite so critical of the Israelis, although behind the scenes they have believed this all along. But now, you know, really upfront in black and white, they're saying that the Israelis are undermining hopes for peace. I mean, the question is, why has Israel chosen to do this now, at this point where, yes, we've been here before, but at a point where the ceasefire appeared to be really very close. So in that sense, Qatar believes that Israel has undermined what was a ceasefire deal in the making.
Mark, talking about the dialogue between Israel and the United States, it's important for us to clarify that it's the Israeli Channel 12 being cited via Reuters, that they say that an Israeli official told them Trump gave the green light for the attack on the Hamas leadership in Qatar. So it is coming to us rather third hand. So it's worth flagging that. Where, Mark, do you think this leaves the US peace plan in the Middle East?
Yeah, I mean, Reuters, as you say, is reporting this. We haven't had it directly from the White House. There's been no comment from the White House so far. One of their Homeland Security officials is currently at the outdoor podium here at the White House giving an update on domestic issues. I mean, it's worth saying that the president right now has got a heck of a lot on his in tray. Just over the course of the past 24 hours, so much has emerged from this Epstein letter, the book that has been released in Congress. That's a massive challenge for the president. He is in it, and it's clearly going to be a focus at the press briefing. Now we have this news of what's been going on in Doha. There is also a massive amount of domestic stuff going on, with the president saying he is, to quote his tweet from the weekend, going to declare war on Chicago. He's dialed that back, but he's certainly intent on sending in both the National Guard and ICE agents to carry out immigration raids. So that's the sort of context from an American perspective of just how much is going on. It's going to be one heck of a news conference at 1 o'clock here when Caroline Levitt gets to the podium. But in the context of America and Israel, well, we have seen that Donald Trump appears to be kind of dancing to two tunes. In one sense, it is sort of implicitly clear that he is allowing Israel to do what it wants in Gaza, and yet at the same time, he is consistently saying that he wants peace, that he thinks peace is close, that he thinks a ceasefire is close. Well, plainly, what has happened in Qatar, in Doha today, will set that peace process that Donald Trump says he wants. It will set it back significantly.
Mark, thank you very much for that. Mark Stone, our US correspondent in Washington. So if you are just joining us, a reminder of the breaking news this hour, that there has been an explosion in the Qatari capital, Doha, in the last hour. And Israel says that they have launched a strike targeting Hamas's leadership there. This is further widening their campaign against the militant group. There were negotiations underway, negotiations over ending the war in the Gaza Strip. Mark was saying there that those negotiations appeared to be going well, that there was a possible ceasefire. Others say that the negotiations had reached a stalemate, but we saw black smoke rising over the skyline of the Qatari capital, Doha. The Israelis say that they were targeting two senior members of Hamas, Khalil al-Hayya and Jabarin. We are going to bring you a lot more on this, rolling on this throughout the afternoon. It is 3 o'clock. If you're just joining us, our breaking news is that Israel says it's launched an attack on Hamas officials in the Qatari capital, Doha. The strike took place in the Qatar district to the north of the city centre. Israeli media has claimed that the US was notified and gave the green light for the attack. That has not been confirmed by the White House yet. In a statement, the IDF confirmed that the IDF and ISA conducted a precise strike targeting the senior leadership of the Hamas terrorist organization. For years, these members of the Hamas leadership have led the terrorist organization's operations, are directly responsible for the brutal October 7th massacre, and have been orchestrating and managing the war against the State of Israel. Prior to the strike, measures were taken in order to mitigate harm to civilians, including the use of precise munitions and additional intelligence. The IDF and ISA will continue to operate with determination in order to defeat the Hamas terrorist organization responsible for the October the 7th massacre. The US Embassy in Doha says the US Embassy has instituted a shelter-in-place order for their facilities. US citizens are advised to shelter in place and monitor social media for updates. In the last few moments, we've had a tweet from Bezalel Smotrich, a right-wing member of Benjamin Netanyahu's government. He says terrorists have no immunity from the long arm of Israel anywhere in the world. A correct decision we made and perfect execution by the IDF and Shin Bet. Thanks to everyone and to the Holy One, blessed be he who gives us the strength to do great things. So that is a translation of a tweet in Hebrew from Bezalel Smotrich from the Israeli government. Interesting in that, perfect execution, in his words, by the IDF. We do not know yet whether this operation by the IDF actually achieved what they set out to do. We just know that there was an explosion. So that possibly gives us some guidance as to whether or not that it actually was a strike that actually succeeded in carrying out its aims. Let's bring in political analyst Dr. Ahmed Al-Kuhuze, who joins us now. Give us your reaction to what's happened in the last hour, if you would.
Well, the least of it, I could say that I am shocked, especially with the undergoing negotiations that many thought it was going in the right direction.
You say that, and that was echoed by Mark Stone, our US correspondent, that it did seem to be going in the right direction. What more can you tell us of this? We understand from the Qataris that the Hamas delegation travelled from Turkey today to Qatar. They presumably would have been travelling on the understanding that there was a point to them coming here, that there could be some progress made.
Let's look at it. I mean, let's take a step back and look at it holistically. Just last week, we had a massive statement by the Emiratis regarding the continuity of the Abraham Accords, regarding the statements made by the Israelis concerning the expansion in the West Bank. This will lead us to the same direction, unfortunately. The Gulf state works as one. It's a unity, and I think the Gulf states will look at this as a hostility towards their sovereignty. That's not good on one hand. On the other hand, listening to you now talking about the green light given by the Americans, if confirmed, I don't think this would be something against the American interest in the Gulf. So maybe we'll hear later on that it was coordinated. I'm not sure. If it is, this will be on the good side. If it's not, this could escalate the matter of the whole peace process in the whole of the Middle East, not just on Qatar, not just on the Gazans.
I mean, yeah, how does the US square it? How does President Trump square, on one hand, going to Saudi Arabia, going to Qatar, going to the UAE, sitting down with their leaders in their gold and marbled palaces, shaking their hands and saying, these are countries America can do business with. And then a few months later, apparently sanctioning this from Israel.
Still, nothing is understandable. It's been just 1 hour, yet it's been almost a few months now since President Trump became president again. He conducts his business in a way where many people don't understand, many people can't comprehend. Is it working? Is it not? As well, we have no clue yet, but the sovereignty of the Gulf states is a red line to all Gulf states, and I don't think this will lead to any good consequences over the foreseen future.
What of the timing? Why do you think Israel decided to do this now?
I really don't get it, because we just mentioned that the negotiations were going on the right direction. So it should de-escalate. Why the escalation at the moment? I'm not sure. Are we looking at further escalation with the war against Iran, especially given the statements by the Ayatollah lately? We don't know.
We don't know why this has happened. What about what happens next? I mean, obviously Qatar have condemned it. The UAE has condemned it as well, saying we stand with Qatar. Iran has condemned it also. What impact do you think this could have on terms of alliances in the Middle East?
Well, in terms of the alliances, this is endangering it. I don't see it in a positive way. When it comes to the negotiations, I mean, frankly, this would reflect bad unless there is something we don't know about that it could take it to the positive side, but I don't think so. I don't think it is. And just as I mentioned earlier, this could even escalate the war itself.
I mean, it is a gloomy analysis, it has to be said, that you think that this could escalate the war. But I mean, the point is, if Israel takes out the delegation of negotiators, who else is there for Israel to negotiate with on behalf of the Palestinians in Gaza?
No one, because today they basically stepped on Qatar's toes. Last week it was the Emirati nerves and the Saudis. I mean, who's left? These are the countries that stood in the middle ground, trying to bring everybody to terms, especially when it comes to the negotiations and the war they fought against Iran lately.
Dr.
Now they're stepping on their toes.
Sorry to cut across you, because there's some quite significant news which has just dropped from the Reuters news agency. 2 Hamas sources have told Reuters that the ceasefire negotiation delegation in Doha survived the Israeli attack. So that is also incredibly significant, isn't it? If they have survived, you know, in terms of the fact that Israel, there are still negotiators there, but 2, if Israel launch this audacious attack but then don't succeed, that is not good for Israel, is it?
Not at all. And as we just mentioned, both of us, that this will take its toll on the negotiations itself. If they were dead, which they're not, basically, I don't see the same people going to sit in the same room with the same people who tried to assassinate them.
Well, indeed, yes, the future possibilities for peace look further and further away, don't they? Very good to talk to you, Dr. Ahmed Al-Kuzai. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's return to our security and defence analyst here in the studio, Professor Michael Clark, who's still with us. So that is just one source that we have. Reuters say that 2 Hamas sources have told the Reuters group that this negotiation delegation in Doha survived. What do you make of that if Israel didn't succeed in doing what it set out to do?
They may have succeeded in killing the leaders that they're after, like Haya, but the delegation would be quite large. So you're not talking about 2 or 3 people, you're probably talking about a dozen or 15. And this was in the Qatar suburb, so they may not all have been there. It's quite logical they wouldn't all have been in the same place. So it may be that Hamas are just making the point that we're still here. Even though it's very hard to imagine that Hamas would engage in any negotiation anytime soon as a result of this. But quite logically, if there were 15 people involved in the Hamas delegation, they might not all have been in the same building at the same time. So it's logical that they wouldn't all have been killed.
We've got another bit of information that's just come. Now, this is being reported from X. Israel's Prime Minister's office is saying today's action against the top terrorist chieftains, in their words, of Hamas was a wholly independent Israeli operation. Netanyahu's office saying Israel initiated it, Israel concluded it, and Israel takes full responsibility. So whether or not they had the green light from the United States,
I'm still to be convinced about that, Jane. I mean, I'm sure they would have informed the United States, but whether they informed them long enough in advance for the US to say don't do it, I'm not sure. And logically, of course, President Trump or the White House will say yes, we gave it the green light, because if it looks as if they've been defied or manipulated, that's worse. So the first reaction of the White House spokesperson might be to say, or even President Trump himself, yes, I approved it, even if he actually didn't know very much about it until it had happened. We'll see. It's very confused. And I'm still, I think as James was saying, that I can't fathom the logic behind giving the green light to something that would undermine so obviously President Trump's peace plan, which he obviously thought was going quite well.
Mm-hmm. What happens now? Now, we'll just let you know that we're getting even more from the UAE. They have already come out and condemned it. They're now releasing a statement from their foreign ministry. As soon as we're able to bring you that statement, we will. It's presumably going to be in greater depth. They've already said that they stand with Qatar, and then they condemn what they've called a treacherous attack. The UAE coming out.
There's an element here, Jen, with between Qatar and the UAE as well. The two families, the Al Thani family in Qatar and the Al Nahyans in the UAE. I mean, a lot of the animosity between them is family animosity. It's the two dynasties. And the fact that the UAE have come out so quickly and so clearly for Qatar is also a sense that the Gulf states obviously feel that this is an attack on their sovereignty collectively. Quite important.
It is important, isn't it, in the sense that they are banding together here.
They're not together on anything else.
No, but Israel must have... Do you think that will come as a surprise to Israel?
It might. It might. And I think it does mean that Israel's diplomatic future with all of the Gulf states will be very severely affected by this. I mean, the Israelis can certainly get away with assassinations in Tehran, going after the terrorist leaders that they've got in their crosshairs when they go to Tehran, because that's Iran. But going after them in the Gulf states, so you're talking about Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman. Those are collectively, they're an important set of states in the world, not least because of the resources, because of the Persian Gulf, the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz and all the resources that come through there. And the diplomatic role that the Gulf states play in the Middle East. They've got the money, they're the bankers. And so if things are to happen in the Levant, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, these poverty-stricken states, they'll be paid for by the wealth of the Gulf. And, the future of the Middle East is a future in which the Gulf states, as it were, underpin whatever development the other states in the Levant are going to have. Now, Israel is a factor in that equation, but the Israeli factor is completely unpredictable at the moment because Israel is fighting this multi-front war for its own future, to secure a different future for itself. And the unity of the Gulf states is not, the Gulf is not famous for its unity. There's the Gulf Cooperation Council is one of the jokes of international politics, the GCC, because they meet frequently and don't really agree on anything substantive. But this is the sort of thing that does bring them together, because it brings together the sense that they jealously guard their sovereignty. Of course they do. They're all strange states. I mean, in the sense that, not many, they don't have many citizens. Most of the people who are there are expatriate workers or tourists or whatever. I mean, in Qatar, I think the actual population in Qatar is something like 250,000. But there's 3.5, 4 million people who live there. But the Qataris themselves are a very small group. So they guard their sovereignty really jealously. And this sort of attack will actually unite their sense of outrage that they are not being taken seriously as a country. I mean, if these Hamas leaders had been in Geneva, would the Israelis have launched an attack in Geneva against them, or in a European country? The answer must be no, they wouldn't have dared. But they dare to do it in the Gulf. And the Gulf leaderships are very well aware of that.
And that is really interesting when you think about, Trump visiting them. Is he just paying lip service, or does he truly believe what he's doing on these diplomatic missions? I think we can now bring in Dan Pfefferman, who is in Tel Aviv, who is a national security analyst and co-editor of Middle East 24. And Dan, we've talked a lot in the last hour about the impact that this is potentially going to have on the Middle East and on negotiations for peace. But it shouldn't be forgotten, of course, the negotiations for peace are also negotiations about hostage release, aren't they? Where does this leave that?
Yeah, look, Israel, reportedly in coordination with the United States here, came to the very logical conclusion after 2 years of Hamas refusing to end this war. Of course, Hamas started this on October 7th, completely unprovoked. and refuses to end the war, refuses to surrender, refuses to release the hostages, refuses to disarm. This is after the Arab League just a month ago called for Hamas to disarm, release the hostages, and surrender. And it's clear, it is very clear, it has been clear from the start, if anyone who knows who Hamas is, who Muslim Brotherhood organizations are, there is no ceasefire, there is no peace. They're looking for, at best, a respite in order to regroup, rearm, and conduct, in their own words, another October 7th strike again and again and again. They have been using the hostages as a lifeline. They clearly don't care about the well-being of the people of Gaza, who are unfortunately caught in the middle of this horrible war, even if Israel's doing all it can to minimize civilian casualties, while Hamas is actually doing all it can to maximize civilian casualties. And so Israel is constantly seeking ways in which to pressure and break Hamas and bring it to agree to end this war by doing what any losing side in the history of war has done, and that is surrender.
But if you have members of Hamas who are at least willing to meet for negotiations, as we understand this team were, and go to a third country in order to have negotiations about peace, what does a state like Israel gain from trying to take them out?
Look, you've used the word peace now twice, and this is not the same language they use in Hamas. This is not their mode of thinking. They're not looking for peace. They're looking for a way to take a break so they can regroup and rearm and launch additional attacks on Israel. Their entire raison d'etre is to destroy the state of Israel. So this is not peace. Let's not fool ourselves. Let's not kid ourselves that they're ever seeking an actual ceasefire peace. They're looking for a rest so they can regroup.
Okay, let me phrase it a different way. Whether or not Hamas want peace, what Israel presumably wants, and certainly what the families of the hostages want, is for those hostages that are still alive inside Gaza and for those who've perished to be brought back into Israel. That, for Israel, presumably, is the point of these negotiations. Where does this attack leave that?
There's 3 points to the negotiations. One of them is, of course, the 20 remaining hostages and the additional roughly 30 bodies. But also it is to defeat Hamas. If this war ends without a clear defeat of Hamas, then it didn't end, and it will continue in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years. And of course, Israel wants to get out of Gaza. Israel has no interest in being in Gaza. Israel left Gaza in 2005. From what I'm understanding, Hamas uses these negotiations to drag out time, to buy more time for itself, and is not actually negotiating in good faith, just like it did with the first round of hostage release. It sends out the hostages piece by piece, one by one, in order to drag out the time, but also the misery and the agony and the tension in the Israeli public. They're constantly playing psychological warfare. And so my understanding is Israel reached a conclusion, perhaps even that the negotiations here, Hamas was going to turn down yet again Israel's offer to end this war in a clear and decisive way. Otherwise, you're right, there would be no point in striking this meeting of foreign Hamas leaders. So my understanding is that there was an understanding among these Hamas officials that they were going to reject yet again Israel's offer and the United States offer, and even Qatar's main sponsor of Hamas and of Muslim Brotherhood. They were even rejecting Qatar's offers and entreaties to end this war. And so Israel is caught here, constantly trying to figure out ways to pressure an organization that refuses to bend, no matter how many losses it takes. And once again, unfortunately, it's the Palestinian people who pay the price for Hamas's radicalism and recklessness.
What, though, of launching an attack on Hamas in a third country, a country that has hosted negotiations, a country that is friendly to Donald Trump? What do you think is the merit of that?
I think this follows up on what President Trump's warning to Hamas not so long ago, that this is their last chance to accept the offer. We've seen time and again that there is no safe place for terrorist leaders, and perhaps this is the escalation that has been put into place. Until now, the sort of official agreement between the United States and Qatar is that Qatar hosts Hamas and other jihadist leaders, in a place where the United States at least has some eyes and at least some semblance of influence on them through I don't want to call it a friendly government. Qatar is not a friendly government, but it is a government that Western countries can talk to, perhaps the
and those alliances are
here.
important, aren't they? Dan Pfefferman, it's important for a country like Israel, a country that's in the Middle East, to have countries that it can negotiate with and can use as a base. So why then bomb them?
Absolutely. And so, first of all, this is a targeted strike, and this is not broad strikes. This is very, very pinpoint strikes from everything we've seen. And again, what this speaks to, the only logical conclusion that I can come to, and from the information I have, is that Israel and possibly the United States, by the way, I wouldn't be surprised if the Qataris even knew in advance that Hamas was once again refusing to cooperate, refusing to end this war. And so it would be very logical to me, even obvious, that the United States greenlit this attack. And that Israel and its various allies with which it likely consults with saw no other way to pressure Hamas rather than going directly after its leadership. And I think the message needs to be clear. Hamas in Gaza, outside of Gaza, in Turkey and Qatar and other places is not safe unless it voluntarily, finally agrees to end this war, disarm, and admit defeat and leave Gaza.
OK, very interesting to talk to you, Dan Pfefferman, there, Israeli national security analyst. And it should be said that we haven't had confirmation from America that they have given the green light to Israel for this. Israel has, in the last few minutes, said that this was an independent Israeli operation. I think now we can cross to our Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons, who joins us now. Adam, it was a question that I put there to Dan Pfefferman, but where does this attack leave the families of those hostages that are still inside Gaza? Where does it leave them in terms of hope of getting their loved ones back alive?
Well, as you might imagine, we have a huge amount of reaction coming in. In terms of those hostage families, they don't speak with one voice, but we've just seen messages coming in from the forum that represents some of the families of hostages. And in one case, one of the families is saying, "You have killed our child," that they are saying that this action, they believe, will result in the death of hostages. Now, of course, they don't know that, but that is their reaction. These are people who've been calling for a ceasefire and now believe that that is impossible, and that, and I have to say, they are not the only people saying that their reaction is that what this tells them is that the prospect of a ceasefire is dead, that they now anticipate that Israel will launch a full offensive on Gaza City and will then continue to try to take over the whole of the Gaza Strip and effectively annex it. Will try to destroy Hamas, and their fear is that that will lead to the death of hostages. Let me tell you some other bits of information coming in. I understand that the United States was informed by Israel about this attack. My understanding is that Qatar was not, that this attack was not flagged up to the Qataris in advance by Israel, but there are Israeli sources suggesting that the US may have acted as a channel of communication in forewarning Qatar. I think you've just been hearing there so much speculation about how much Qatar would have known about this attack. You'll have seen in that statement put out by the IDF them talking about mitigating potential harm to civilians. The question would be, well, how would you do that? How could you possibly mitigate that harm if there was no way for civilians to have been warned? The United States certainly acted in terms of warning its civilians and its staff to take shelter. But I think let's put this also in context. This is an extraordinary moment in this long-running conflict. Qatar is not Yemen. It is not Iran. It is not any of the countries with whom Israel has been trading missiles. It is a wholly different concept. This is a rich nation that hosted the World Cup and which has been hosting negotiations supposedly for a ceasefire in Gaza, and which hosts plays host to an enormous American air base. It is completely different from the other targets that Israel has been involved in militarily. And so for Israel to launch airstrikes into Qatar it is audacious and is a kind of escalation that, I have to be honest, absolutely nobody, as far as I'm aware, predicted this happening. So this city, Jerusalem, this country, is at the moment in a state of shock. Benjamin Netanyahu coming out and saying that Israel carried this out on its own, takes full responsibility. There will be those who will join the dots and say, well, just yesterday morning, there was an attack that killed 6 Israeli civilians, not that far from where I'm standing now, an attack that Hamas this morning took responsibility for. And so it may be, and I'm guessing here, educated guess, right, this could be an attack that had been planned and was sped up, because there are clearly members of the government, and there is the Prime Minister himself, who are keen to make a mark, keen to appear very strong, even within that context, even within the realms of politicians who want to be tough on Gaza, tough on the West Bank, tough on Lebanon, tough on Iran's proxies. The step up is to launch airstrikes on Qatar.
Adam, thanks very much for now, because we can just bring you the latest images that we have. That we do have footage of the actual explosion, I believe. Let's see what we can show you. So this is the aftermath of the explosion, but you can certainly hear the emergency vehicles. And it could well be that there was more than one explosion as well. But these are new pictures that we have with sound on them, so we should just listen to them for a little bit. Let's return to Adam. Adam, yeah, we are just bringing these new pictures. Some of them are quite confused, but they clearly come from quite close proximity to where this explosion heard. I mean, in terms of politically, of course, the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog, he's visiting the UK tomorrow, isn't he? He's not, he is a different political figure from Benjamin Netanyahu, but there will be difficult questions, won't there, for him when he comes tomorrow?
Like, there are so many difficult questions now for any Israeli leader to follow. So let's try and pick up on some of them. Isaac Herzog, I believe he's flying out from Israel today, and he will be landing in the United Kingdom. He is going to meet MPs, he's going to meet Jewish groups across the UK, he's due to address conferences. But I mean, the questions that are going to come to him will be why this attack on Qatari sovereign territory? Is this the end of any possibility of a ceasefire? I mean, how you can conduct negotiations with people that you have tried to kill, I mean, it seems impossible to imagine. But also there will be the questions that remain for Isaac Herzog about the conduct of the Israeli military in Gaza, about the way that it has behaved in the West Bank, about the rhetoric coming out from Benjamin Netanyahu and Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, and we could go on, so many members of the cabinet, and the extent, frankly, to which Israel is beginning to look like a pariah state in the eyes of so many other countries. Remember, next week we have the UN General Assembly meeting in New York. At the moment, Mahmoud Abbas, who met Sir Keir Starmer yesterday, is banned from going to the UN General Assembly, along with the Palestinian delegation. And yet, at that meeting, various countries are intending to recognise the state of Palestine, an act that many politicians here in Israel and the United States believe is incredibly inflammatory and misguided. So Isaac Herzog is going to arrive in the middle of a political storm, not just of rhetoric, but of actions. And I would caution that he and Netanyahu are different. One is the president, one is the prime minister. The president is more of a ceremonial figure. But he is a political heavyweight, and there is a gap between the two of them. Isaac Herzog is not the hardliner that Benjamin Netanyahu is, so it's going to be very interesting to see what he says in support and where he hedges that support. Interesting, but frankly, it won't necessarily change the dial, because the person calling the shots is Netanyahu, and the two people whispering into his ears are Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and other members of the cabinet. And it's very hard to find a moderating voice, except almost remarkably, bearing in mind what we've seen over many years in many countries, by all accounts, the most moderate voice in Security Cabinet meetings is Eyal Zamir, the Chief of Staff of the Israel Defense Forces, the person who we know has said, why are we going into Gaza City in such numbers? Why are we putting our soldiers at risk? And why are we imperiling the lives of hostages? And further to our point, more messages coming out from families of hostages who are still being held in Gaza, saying that their lives are in peril. One of them saying that Benjamin Netanyahu has assassinated her son through these actions. Israel was already a tense, fraught country, really divided by differences of political, ethical, moral opinions. This is going to exacerbate so much of that.
And you talked about not shifting the dial, especially in the last few moments. We've had word from the UN's chief, Antonio Guterres, perhaps unsurprisingly, has condemned the Israeli strike on Qatar. He says it is a flagrant violation of sovereignty, the territorial integrity of Qatar. He is condemning it in the strongest possible terms. He says all parties must work towards achieving a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, not destroying it. This will be like water off a duck's back to Benjamin Netanyahu, won't it? He doesn't especially hold the UN in high regard.
No, he thinks the United Nations is a busted flush. He's thrown UNRWA, it's Palestinian-focused agency, out of East Jerusalem almost completely. He thinks that the reports that the UN endorsed about famine are flawed and based on Hamas propaganda. The list goes on. One thing we need to look out for here is the reaction of the United States. The one person in the world, bluntly, who can change Benjamin Netanyahu's mind is Donald Trump. Now, we know that the Americans were told about this attack, but remember, there is a huge American military base in Qatar, and the Americans, more than anything, want stability in the Middle East. They want this to be a region that calms down. Now, they have always railed in behind Israel. Nobody more so than Donald Trump. Perhaps the only person more so than Donald Trump is Mike Huckabee, his ambassador here in Jerusalem, who is, by the way, hosting a reception tonight, a delayed reception in celebration of Independence Day, and that is being held at the Museum of Tolerance in the heart of Jerusalem. They knew in advance that this was happening. We don't know how long in advance the US is. It's going to be crucial to see how Donald Trump reacts to this. If he believes that Israel has overstepped its mark, then they will listen to that. But one can only assume at the moment that if Israel told America it was going to carry out this attack, then that was the moment when the president or any of his cabinet could have said, no, that's too much, that's inflammatory. So on that basis, in the absence of a denial, we have to assume that America gave the okay, and I come back to this, for this extraordinary decision to attack the sovereign territory of Qatar using airstrikes on another Gulf state. It is for many people in Israel, it is a moment for shaking your head and saying a region that has witnessed some remarkable, terrible scenes in recent times. This one really has come as big a surprise as anything.
Adam, in the last few moments, we are hearing again via Reuters that Saudi Arabia has strongly condemned the attack by Israel on Doha. They have described it as being brutal. So Saudi Arabia lining up behind the United Arab Emirates and Iran to back Doha. They are warning, Saudi Arabia are warning against dire consequences of Israeli persistence in its criminal violations. Adam, just briefly, these are very strong diplomatic words, aren't they? Dire consequences.
Yes, but think of the reverse. I mean, which country in the world is going to come out now and say, fair enough, yeah, we understand exactly why you did this? I can't think of anybody except potentially the United States. So I would imagine, look, the voice of Saudi Arabia rings loud in this region. Clearly, Qatar's voice will ring very loudly after this, but I would expect condemnation from the European Union en masse. I'm struggling to think of many nations who are not going to condemn this, because this is one country launching an airstrikes on another, regardless of who the targets are. In fact, even considering who the targets are, in the eyes of many, these will be people who are trying to negotiate a ceasefire to stop the killing. Over 63,000 people killed so far in Gaza. I don't think Israel is going to find a group of many friends around the world willing to stick up for them, except potentially the man in the White House. And if he defends them, then Benjamin Netanyahu will feel that once again he can act pretty much with impunity.
We told you about Antonio Guterres talking at the UN a short while ago. We can bring you now that footage. Let's listen in.
I condemn this flagrant violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar. All parties must work towards achieving a permanent ceasefire, not destroying it. Today's breaking news underscores the importance of the report that we launched today. It lays bare a stark reality. The world is spending far more on waging war than on building peace.
Antonio Guterres a short time ago. Well, let's now bring in Edmund Fitton-Brown, former British ambassador to Yemen, now a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Edmund, interesting to talk to you, given that Yemen was also a country that was attacked by Israel in the past. Then they were targeting Iranians, so it's not the first time they've carried out an attack in this way. But how significant would you say what has happened today?
Well, this is a change because we're talking about a GCC country. In the case of Yemen, of course, the Israelis were attacking Houthi targets, and they were only attacking them in response to Houthi attacks on Israel. So I think your previous guest made an important point about the attitude of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, because he gave a last warning to Hamas on Sunday. And the Israelis are saying that they informed the Americans in advance of this. And it is hard to conclude anything other than that the Americans gave them the green light. But of course, we don't know that yet.
In terms of countries that are lining up behind Doha to support them, so far the United Arab Emirates, Iran and Saudi Arabia have all stood squarely behind Doha and said how the UAE says they've stood behind a treacherous attack, called it blatant and cowardly. Iran has called it an international violation of law. Saudi Arabia has warned against the consequences of these criminal violations. Do you think this changes anything in the geopolitics of this part of the world?
I think it's too soon to say. It's important to separate what Iran says from what the Saudis and the Emiratis say. The Iranian reaction to this is entirely predictable, and Iran doesn't have any credibility internationally. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates do have a great deal of credibility internationally. Of course, they are both part of the Gulf Cooperation Council, along with Qatar. Now, the Gulf Cooperation Council is actually quite a close alliance, even though there have been tensions within it, particularly between Qatar and the UAE and between Qatar and Saudi Arabia in the past. So what we have to try to analyze is, how angry are the Saudis and the Emiratis about this? They would be expected to be critical of the strike because they have to show solidarity with their ally Qatar. But what we don't really know is how much anger there is behind these statements.
We've just had, actually, as we're speaking, some statements via Reuters from Saudi's Crown Prince. We know that he has already said that he's warned against these dire consequences. Well, we now understand that he has spoken with the Qatari Emir and that he has also affirmed his kingdom's support to deploy all capabilities to support Qatar after the Israeli attack. So what would you read into that, this suggestion that potentially, sounds like military support? I mean, I presume it's political support.
Well, it's certainly political support. I very much doubt that it would be meaningful military support. I can't see that any country in the Arabian Peninsula is looking to actually start a military confrontation with Israel. One of the things that I think is important to remember is that this is not the first attack on Qatari soil this year. The Iranians also launched an attack on Qatari soil earlier this year. And of course, people were angry about that, and there was a good deal of condemnation, but the incident was contained.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, it's a good reminder that you have done this. I mean, in terms of future negotiations about the peace in Gaza, will this stop other countries in the Middle East hosting such negotiations, do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, there's obviously a real difficulty over the Qatari role with Hamas. And the Qataris will say that, it was understood that they were trying to negotiate and help negotiations. The Israelis have argued since the 7th of October 2023 that the game has changed and that Hamas can no longer be tolerated as a party in the way that it used to be. In my view, the really important question is, has this in any way inconvenienced the American attempts to bring about a deal between the Israelis and Hamas and a ceasefire? Now, I assume, given that Donald Trump made that last warning statement on Sunday and that the Israelis say that they consulted the Americans first, I can only assume that when Donald Trump spoke of the last warning, he also then said, and this is okay because we don't think Hamas is responding positively. But if this has disrupted American efforts towards a ceasefire, then that will be more problematic.
Do you think what happened on Monday, the bus attack in which 6 people died, was sort of the prod that Israel needed to actually feel that this was the right time?
Well, I mean, that's obviously something one can speculate. It looks as if the attack was quite precisely targeted. I don't know yet whether the attack achieved its objective, which seems to have been primarily aimed against Hamas leadership figures in Doha. But if the Israelis were looking for a precisely targeted attack, then it may have been operationally driven rather than caused by the attack yesterday.
Edmund Fitton-Brown, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracy and former British Ambassador to Yemen. Thank you very much. Very interesting to talk to you today. As we were talking there, another line coming to us from the Pope, who has spoken to the Answer news agency. Pope Leo has commented on the Israeli strikes on Qatar, saying that the entire situation is very serious. Let's return to Professor Michael Clark, who joins me in the studio. I think it's fair to say very serious does cover it, doesn't
Yes.
it? We've talked a lot about what's going on in the Gulf and in terms of the relationship between the different countries. Perhaps I haven't talked enough quite about America's relationship with Qatar and Doha. And of course, there's that huge American base there, isn't there, CENTCOM, where they ran the second Gulf War from.
That's right, Al Udeid. It's about 20 miles west of Doha City itself. It keeps itself to itself because there's about 10,000 US service personnel. There's usually about 1,000 British as well. And they are a city in a city because to avoid any embarrassment and difficulties, they just keep out of the way. They don't go into Doha very much itself. So it's an entirely separate organisation, but it is the centre of Central Command, US Central Command in the Middle East. It's a great planning cell. There's a lot of flights that go in and out of there all the time. It's very, very active. And again, it shows that the United States has a lot of common interest with Qatar. I mean, Qatar is very good for the US, and Qatar puts in quite a lot of money to keep the Al Udeid base going. So the Qataris pay for most of the establishment of the base, which the Americans use. And the American presence there doesn't put a lot of money into the Qataris' economy, because it's not as if you've got American service personnel going and spending money in Doha. They don't, for cultural reasons. They just stay separate.
Well, on the base, there's things like McDonald's and stuff, aren't they? You know, they have all their home comforts on the base itself.
They do. It's all there. It's just like being in an American city, and that's what it feels like when you're there. So it's interesting that the US has so much going with Qatar, that the idea that the United States, as it were, gave a green light to this, I still find difficult to fathom. Now, a couple of the comments we've heard in the last half hour, which are in a sense defending Israel's actions, would seem to imply that both Israel and America have given up on the peace process that was developing over the weekend. That somehow what Edmund was saying is that maybe on Sunday, we're 48 hours on from that now, but on Sunday, President Trump, as it were, gave Hamas a final warning, and in a way had already decided that this peace process, which we thought was getting close, was actually dead. I found it quite hard to believe. Until this morning, there was a sense that this peace process was getting close to something. And the idea that, well, Hamas were never going to agree, so we might as well hit them, might be a view inside Israel and inside the Netanyahu government. I find it hard to believe that was a view in the White House.
But also, when we spoke to Dr. Ahmed Al-Khuzai a little earlier, he too said exactly the same, that there was a potential for a ceasefire. It felt like there was progress being made on that front, on those negotiations.
That's right.
So if there was progress, why then try to take out the people that you're negotiating with?
That's why it doesn't make sense. I mean, the general mood, in the newsroom here this morning, the general mood when we were talking and thinking about Gaza was that actually something might be coming out of this. I mean, the pressure's on Hamas to agree. It looks as if they're going to string it out, but they may agree. That President Trump was quite optimistic about the offer that he made. Of course, he always makes his offers with a threat. This is your last chance. I mean, he said that before to Hamas, and they ignored it last time as well. He said, hell will be let loose on you, and nothing happened. So there was a sense in which people thought, well, this is the way it works. It's moving towards something which may or may not be a deal. But the idea that it was somehow dead in the water, that it wasn't going to happen, I don't think that was the view, certainly around here, until a couple of hours ago. And so this attack has completely changed the expectations. And if those changed expectations were what the White House was thinking, they weren't communicating that. Other than President Trump's tweet on Sunday, nobody in the White House was communicating that over the last 36 hours. Around European capitals, there was a sense that we were moving towards something. It wouldn't be very satisfactory, but it wasn't dead, for sure.
Do you think what happened yesterday, this bus attack, changed that? Because Israel will say that Hamas don't want peace. And if they will argue, well, if on Sunday Hamas were given a final warning that this, this has to work with negotiations, and Hamas's response to that is then on Monday, its armed wing has today said that they were involved in that attack, which killed 6 people and injured 12 in Jerusalem. Netanyahu's supporters will say, well, this just proves that Hamas doesn't want peace. This was their reaction to being told we have to get down and get these negotiations, or that as the negotiations get close to the wire, this is what they do, they sabotage it.
Yeah, and that's a credible argument. You could say that the bus attack yesterday created this sort of tumble of events that we've seen, that we talked about earlier on, statements and the finding of machine guns at the site, which are usually produced in workshops on the West Bank. Israel saying that they know who these terrorists are, and then Hamas claiming responsibility. It all seems to have gone forward in a sort of action-reaction thing that looks almost neat. One of the things I would say, though, is that the bus attack yesterday, it's hard to set those things up for terrorist groups at very short notice. Usually they are a certain amount of time in the planning, and there's a bit of reconnaissance has to go on. How are you going to get guns into the area, onto the buses? How are you going to do it? How are you going to enter? Getting away isn't a problem. If you're planning to die at the moment of the act, which these people obviously were, they knew they were going to die. They knew they were going to be suicide terrorists. Then a lot of the planning doesn't matter because you're not trying to escape. Nevertheless, it's quite hard to set up any terrorist attack just in a matter of hours. Normally, these things take days and weeks to plan because you've got to work out exactly what you're going to do and how you're going to get there and how you're going to bring the weapons you want to use onto the scene. So my guess would be that the bus attack yesterday was a bit more of a random act, which happened to occur yesterday, which was in the middle of things that happened last week and the things that were due to happen this week. But it has set in train a series of events, and it may be, you could say, well, maybe the Israeli government Netanyahu was being opportunistic. On the basis of the bus attack, this gave him the opportunity to really go after Hamas, to ratchet things up, and to, as it were, not have to take the blame for the fact that the peace negotiations are not going to go anywhere. Because he doesn't want peace. He doesn't want these negotiations to succeed until he feels he's completely defeated Hamas. And he was always going to be some distance away from that.
Perhaps no surprise that we're now hearing from Turkey's foreign ministry. They have condemned Israel's attack against Hamas on Qatar. They are saying that Israel's attack shows Israel does not want peace. It wants to continue war. Also, we've heard in the last few minutes from Danny Danon, he's Israel's UN envoy, saying on Twitter the precise strike in Doha was targeted at senior Hamas leaders who planned the October the 7th massacre and celebrated while our citizens were abducted. I commend our security forces for this courageous and precise operation. There is no hiding place for terrorists, and we will continue to pursue them everywhere. So very much echoing the words that we've already heard out of the Israeli government. Another line coming out of Turkey from its foreign ministry, it says the Israeli attack in Doha shows it has adopted expansionism, terrorism as a state policy. So very strong diplomatic words coming out of Qatar, the UAE, Iran, Saudi Arabia and now Turkey against what has happened in Israel. Also hearing from China's embassy in Qatar. It has issued a safety reminder to Chinese nationals. We know that the US embassy had issued a warning to its nationals to shelter. China's embassy in Qatar has also issued safety reminders as well to its staff as we look at these images of the Doha skyline. Well, let's return to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who joins us now from the White House. A great deal of speculation, Mark, about what the communications between Israel and America were over this, whether Israel had the US's backing, whether the US gave Israel the green light, or whether it was simply a matter of Israel informing America that this was happening. What do you know?
Yeah, well, the key missing piece is any official reaction from the White House. We have not had it. There's nothing on Donald Trump's social media accounts, nothing from him. We think he's here. We know that his press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, is due to do a news conference that I think will be box office. So many different issues swirling around. We could talk about a few of them in a moment. But on Qatar, we have had two US officials briefed on the matter. A senior White House official briefed on the matter, talking to our colleagues at NBC here in Washington, our sister network. They say that the Israeli government officials notified the United States that they were about to conduct a strike against senior Hamas leadership in advance of today's strikes in Doha. The statement we've got goes on to say the officials say that America did not have a lot of advance notice and made clear that the US was not directly involved in the action. So let's wait and see when there's an expansion on that statement. I mean, what does not much notice actually mean? Was it just minutes notice? And crucially, as you point out, to what extent do the Americans approve of what Israel has now done? The other thing that occurs to me, Jane, I think it's really important, it shouldn't be assumed that Israel suddenly got intelligence to tell them where these Hamas officials in Doha were, and therefore they decided to act because they suddenly had, real-time information that they were there. Remember, the Israelis know precisely where the political wing of Hamas is in Doha, because they have been talking to them. They have been literally in the same hotel. There has been for months and months now this negotiation ongoing in a particular hotel in Doha, the Israeli delegation in one wing of the hotel, the Hamas delegation in the other, and then intermediaries from Egypt and from Qatar and some American officials as well, shuttling across the hotel, trying to find some common ground. That has been going on for months. So the Israelis are fully aware of precisely who is in Doha when it comes to the Hamas delegation. So this was a conscious decision based not on some new knowledge of where Hamas was, but some other reason. Now, the Qataris are explicit today that this was intentionally to disrupt and to undermine the attempt to get a ceasefire. So Qatar really very angry about what has happened, and it seems that their Gulf Arab partners are equally upset. As I say, we await some detail from the White House, from Caroline Leavitt, Donald Trump's press secretary.
Mark Stone in Washington, thanks very much for that. Let's return to our Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons, who joins us now. And Adam, I wondered what reaction there has been in Israel. It's been a couple of hours now since this news broke. What is the feeling there about what has happened and what the impact of it might be on Israel and on the Israeli civilians?
I mean, such a range of opinions. First of all, I would have to say shock. When this happened, there was a moment of getting notifications, getting alerts saying there have been explosions in Doha. And I have to say, I think a lot of people thought, well, what is that all about? And it was only a little after that, then it became apparent that these were not bombs being set off in Doha. These were Israeli airstrikes targeting the Hamas negotiating team. Now, the reaction to that in Israel has slid across the political spectrum. So on the one hand, the person who one assumes ordered this attack is Benjamin Netanyahu, who has taken complete responsibility for it. Now, in terms of the background, my understanding is that this project has been in the planning for months, that there have been regular meetings to discuss it, that those have looked at various scenarios and have been held regularly. So this is not something that has been done on the fly. You might ask, why now? And there would be myriad potentials, but here's a couple to throw in. Number one is that Mr. Netanyahu is highly influenced by two people in his cabinet with very strong, one might even say extreme opinions, and those are Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. Those people have pushed for ever tougher action, and I suspect that they may well have responded yesterday to the killings in Jerusalem and have pushed Mr. Netanyahu to do something about that. And the second thing to say is that my understanding is that the United States knew about this attack in advance and didn't veto it, but that Qatar did not know from the mouths of the Israelis. So that begs the question, did America tell Qatar? And also, while we've heard condemnation from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar itself, I'm sure we will continue to hear that. Nothing so far from the Americans in terms of that condemnation. Is that tacit approval? And does that, by extension, mean they've given up on ceasefire talks and are giving Israel free rein to do almost what it wants in Gaza? And remember, they are planning an enormous military offensive in Gaza City right now.
Well, you said the key question perhaps is why now, but maybe that is also the secondary key question, what next? I mean, do you think that it is the imminent takeover of the whole of Gaza?
So that is the question. And right now, I think a lot of people for the past few weeks have thought that there was a certain amount of shadow play here, that the enormous build-up of this military operation in Gaza City, the so-called Gideon's Chariot 2, was to put pressure on Hamas to sign up for a ceasefire. Now, a few weeks ago, America put forward a new ceasefire proposal, or actually rather negotiators in Cairo, I should say, endorsed by Hamas, which looked very similar to something that an American delegate, Stephen Witkoff, had proposed, which Israel has not even rejected, has just completely ignored. For many people, that kind of raised the spectrum, well, what would it take for you to stop this? Gideon Saar, the foreign minister, said in a briefing I was in that all it would need was for Hamas to give up its hostages and lay down its arms. That sounded like a ceasefire proposal, but Israel has now tried to kill the negotiators acting on behalf of Hamas. It is hard to think of something that is more provocative, more audacious, but also, in the eyes of many, more likely to bring these ceasefire negotiations to an end. And where does that leave us? With the possibility of a huge military offensive.
Thank you very much. You're watching Sky News. It is just coming up to 4 o'clock. We will bring you more on this breaking story throughout the rest of the afternoon.
Jane, thank you. Good afternoon. It is 4 o'clock. I'm Jonathan Samuels. The breaking news this afternoon is that Israel has launched an attack on Hamas officials in the Qatar capital, Doha. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said Israel initiated it, Israel conducted it, and Israel takes full responsibility. Well, the strike took place in the Qatar district to the north of the city centre. The attack is being condemned by Qatar and by Saudi Arabia, as well as by the Secretary General of the United Nations and other countries, including Turkey. Israeli media has claimed that the US was notified and gave the green light for the attack. Well, the Israeli military released this statement a little earlier. The IDF and ISA conducted a precise strike targeting the senior leadership of the Hamas terrorist organisation. For years, these members of the Hamas leadership have led the terrorist organisation's operations, are directly responsible for the brutal October the 7th massacre, and have been orchestrating and managing the war against the State of Israel. Prior to the strike, measures were taken in order to mitigate harm to civilians, including the use of precise munitions and additional intelligence. The IDF and ISA will continue to operate with determination in order to defeat the Hamas terrorist organisation responsible for the October the 7th massacre. And the US Embassy in Doha has said the following. The US Embassy has instituted a shelter-in-place order for their facilities. US citizens are advised to shelter in place and monitor social media for updates. Well, in the past hour, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has criticised the Israeli strikes. Let's have a listen.
We are just learning about the Israeli attacks in Qatar, a country that has been playing a very positive role to achieve a ceasefire and release of all hostages. I condemn this flagrant violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar. All parties must work towards achieving a permanent ceasefire, not destroying it.
Well, in the last few moments, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu says it ordered security forces to prepare the strike on Hamas leaders after Jerusalem and Gaza attacks. We know yesterday, of course, that horrific attack in Jerusalem where 6 people were killed and many others injured. Netanyahu saying the strike was ordered at noon after identifying an operational opportunity. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who's in Washington. But first, let's go to Jerusalem and our Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons. That coming to us in the last few moments then, Adam, it would seem that the attack yesterday in Jerusalem was partly to blame for today's strike in Qatar.
I think it was probably a catalyst. I think it was probably something that focused the opinion. But make no mistake, this wasn't a plan that was just dreamt up on the spur of the moment. For months, we now know the Israeli military has been looking at these plans and pondering how and when it could carry them out in this fashion. Now, yesterday's attack, which killed 6 people, left others seriously wounded, more than 20 people injured. This morning, Hamas, his military wing, took responsibility, claimed responsibility for that attack. They supported it yesterday along with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and today they took responsibility for it. We don't actually know whether or not they were involved. We don't know anything about the background to it. But the fact that Hamas was taking responsibility for an attack that shocked people will, I think, certainly have played very strongly in the Israeli government, not least with Itamar Ben-Gvir, the very far-right minister who was on the scene of that attack yesterday, along with Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister. So this attack may well have given the cabinet the momentum to push for these airstrikes. But let's not in any way underplay this. This is an extraordinary moment for Israel to have launched airstrikes into Qatar. Now, clearly, Israel has launched attack on neighbouring countries. Recently, it's attacked Lebanon, it's attacked Iran. We have all seen the fact that in Gaza, it's over 60,000 people have been killed by Israeli military action. And yet this is something completely different. Qatar is the staging post for negotiations for a ceasefire. Qatar hosted the World Cup. It's a very significant player in geopolitics, and it's home to an enormous American military base. So the word that has been used, which I think strikes home, this is an extraordinary, audacious attack by Israel. And it raises really serious questions now about whether or not Israel is serious about a ceasefire in Gaza, whether Israel has changed its plans towards the West Bank, or whether or not Israel has now moved on to a complete war footing, whether it has written off the chance of a ceasefire, and whether, and I'm using some of the rhetoric of Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, and indeed Mr. Netanyahu himself and Israel Katz and other members of his cabinet, whether they simply feel that this is the time to annex Gaza, to push Palestinians out of that territory, to expect other nations to take them, to do something that would be, frankly, unacceptable to, I think we can say, every other nation in this region, and probably most nations in the world. And so much of this, Jonathan, will revolve around the attitude of the United States. It was told about this attack. Qatar, I understand, was not told. Donald Trump is pretty much Benjamin Netanyahu's only steadfast diplomatic friend in the world at times. And yet Mr. Netanyahu thinks he's the only friend he needs. If the Americans are prepared to rail in behind Israel, even when Israel is attacking another sovereign nation, then Mr. Netanyahu will, I'm sure, feel emboldened. Today, it was the Israeli Prime Minister who said he took full responsibility for this attack. It is hard to believe he would have done it if the American president had told him not to.
Adam in Jerusalem for the moment, thank you very much. Just another line coming out of Israel in the last few moments. Prime Minister Netanyahu and also the Defence Minister Israel Katz saying that they believe the Doha attack was entirely justified. To quote them, it was entirely justified. That's being reported by the Reuters news agency. Let's go straight to the White House, bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone. Mark, what are you hearing about what the White House knew, what the president knew, if anything, before this attack?
Well, first to pick up on Adam's last point, I agree completely that all of this rests with President Trump. He has the ability, if he wanted to be able to influence the Israeli Prime Minister. And his language over many months now can be summed up, and I'm paraphrasing, but he's said it many times, words to the effect of, Netanyahu will do what he needs to do. And I think that phrase is precisely what we're seeing unfold today, a kind of green light by the American president, implicitly, that the Israeli Prime Minister can kind of do what he wants to do. Now, that sits kind of very awkwardly with what Donald Trump has also repeatedly said, which is that he wants peace in the Middle East. He wants peace in Gaza. He wants a ceasefire. He has said that so many times, and yet he's never been able either to articulate how that ceasefire comes about or indeed to make it happen. Remember, as Adam has alluded to, for so many months now, the Americans, the Qataris and the Egyptians have been the intermediaries, literally in one hotel in Qatar, shuttling between Hamas in one wing of the hotel and the Israelis in the other wing of the hotel, trying to find common ground, and they have failed. Now, the Qataris and the Egyptians would argue that that is because Israel has consistently undermined the negotiations. Israel would say, clearly, absolutely not. It is Hamas that doesn't want peace. I think behind the scenes, it is true, and I've spoken to officials over the past couple of days who are close to the negotiations that had been ongoing, and they have said that the latest proposal will not be acceptable to parts of Hamas. Remember, too, that Hamas is distinct. The political wing of Hamas operates in Qatar. The military wing of Hamas, much more hardline, is still in Gaza. Now, for them, the idea of releasing all the hostages now and then effectively get killed afterwards, because that is what will happen. Why would they do that? They are of the ideology that they would rather die with all the hostages now. So that, I think, gets to the heart of why the military wing of Hamas would never accept any sort of peace proposal that is ongoing. Nevertheless, it is also plainly the case that elements within Israel do not want this ceasefire to come about, because, as Adam was explaining, they want elements within Netanyahu's government. They want Gaza. They believe it is their own. They want to reoccupy it. And Netanyahu appears to be falling in line with that view, not least because his government is propped up by the people who espouse that view. In terms of what is actually happening here at the White House, we're expecting a news conference by Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, at 1 o'clock, so in a couple of hours' time. It's going to be very, very interesting, very busy, so much going on. But we can tell you that US government officials have said that they were notified by Israel before this attack took place. But Axios, the news agency Axios, is now reporting that the US officials have said they were only notified after the Israeli missiles were already in the air, and that they had no chance to be able to influence the events. That may be, you take that for what it is, either convenient for the Americans to say that, or perhaps it is true. We will find out more, I hope, from the news conference with Caroline Leavitt shortly, but no word at all yet from the president himself.
Yeah, we will all be watching and listening to every word. Mark, for the moment at the White House, thank you. We are also getting reaction from Egypt, saying that Egypt strongly condemns the Israeli attack on Doha. That coming from the president's office. Egypt saying the escalation undermines global efforts for de-escalation in the region. Well, let's bring in former UK ambassador to Iran, Nicholas Hopton. Good to see you this afternoon. A huge moment for Israel, a huge moment for the Middle East. How significant do you think these strikes are?
Good afternoon. I think this is a very significant escalation, and it's an escalation which probably doesn't take hopes for peace in the right direction. I think it effectively jeopardizes meaningful negotiations, if indeed there have been meaningful negotiations, which is possibly not the case. But it takes things probably to a more difficult position, where you're seeing the reactions from around the world and big questions, really, for the government of Israel, and also particularly for the White House, as to how to justify what looks very much to be a violation of international law and an attack on a sovereign nation which is allied to the United States, and which is a nation, in fact, that the United States defended from Iranian missiles back in June, but for whatever reason did not do so today.
Certainly Gulf states are queuing up to condemn this, and it would seem that maybe the only country which will back Israel over this is potentially the United States. We're yet to get the official word. That will come a little bit later, as our correspondent was saying, Mark Stone. I mean, if that is the case, it almost gives Netanyahu carte blanche to do what he wants.
I think two things I'd say to that. The first one is yes, Prime Minister Netanyahu does, and his government do seem to be behaving outside of international norms, violating international law in the eyes of many, both in Gaza and across the region, and particularly this attack today, which is hard to see how it could be justified on a sovereign nation. And that is obviously a very worrying situation, particularly for the countries in the region, if Israel is going to behave in that way, acting apparently with impunity. And on the other hand, it poses a very big question for the United States government, and particularly President Trump, because if indeed the US was indeed did know about the attacks as they were happening, but was unable to stop them, which is military experts will be better placed than me to discuss whether that is plausible. But I think that it is embarrassing for President Trump because it shows that he has lost any influence or control over Prime Minister Netanyahu's actions at this point, and his recent proposals for a peace settlement have been ignored completely. And I think that puts the US in a very difficult diplomatic and political position vis-à-vis their allies in the Arab world.
While you're talking to us, we've just had a press release from the hostages and missing families in Israel. They say that the families of the hostages are following the developments in Doha with deep concern and heavy anxiety. A grave fear now hangs over the price that the hostages may pay. We know from the survivors who've returned that the revenge directed at the hostages is brutal. The chance of bringing them back now faces greater uncertainty than ever before, with one thing of absolute certainty: their time is running out. The price for the 48 hostages could be unbearable. The living hostages, and we believe there are up to about 20 of them, could be murdered at any moment, and the deceased could disappear forever. The time has come to end the war, and that press release ends with the words, "We demand the Israeli government presents us with an organised plan for a comprehensive agreement to return all 48 hostages." That's from the Hostages Families Forum headquarters. Nicholas Hopton, just listening to that, does it show, do you think, this attack in Doha, that the release of the hostages isn't at the heart of Benjamin Netanyahu's reasoning for continuing the war in Gaza?
Well, one feels huge compassion for the families of the hostages who must be going through hell at this time. Because, as you say, it would appear that the actions of today, killing the many, probably, of the remaining Hamas leadership, may well put their lives even more at risk. I think that one can reach conclusions on the way that Prime Minister Netanyahu's government is prosecuting the war. In some ways, he will be able to say, yes, I've delivered on one of the promises I made after the atrocities, the appalling terrorist attacks of 7th of October 23. He'll be able to say, I have destroyed Hamas to an extent. But one wonders, of course, how that will play out for future generations, the thousands of children who've been orphaned in Gaza and the many others who've been impacted by this extended conflict, now coming up for 2 years. So it doesn't look as if the Israeli government has been engaging, particularly prioritizing the return of hostages as it takes actions like this and accelerates its takeover of Gaza on the ground, Gaza City being its main focus at the moment. So a very bleak day, not only for the families of the hostages, but also for the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and I think for the Middle East generally.
And as a diplomat, you'll be well aware that before October the 7th, with the Abraham Accords, Israel was normalising relations, wasn't it? Building bridges in the Middle East. Well, this surely sets back things many, many years.
Well, we'll have to see how that plays out. It's very fluid at the moment. It's fragile. But the Abraham Accords do still exist with those countries, in Arab countries that signed them following diplomacy under the last Trump administration. And they were paused effectively following the Hamas terrorist attacks. But it's hard to see how they will be improved or spread further to other countries in the light of the way that the conflict is escalating.
And should negotiations continue at some stage, in some form, where on earth would they take place now?
Well, the reaction of the Qatari government has been outraged, understandably. Majid al-Ansari, who is the Prime Minister's right-hand man, spokesman on these issues, and an experienced diplomat, today has said that Qatar will not tolerate this kind of violation of its sovereignty. I think also the Qataris may conclude that they have tried their best, and they've gone through repeated rounds of negotiations and mediation with the Egyptians and the US in partnership, trying to bring peace between the parties over the last almost 2 years. But if neither of the parties are engaging with sincerity, as seems to have been the case often, whether one side or the other, and the situation is now drawing Qatar itself into the firing line, I imagine there will be questions asked within the Prime Minister's office in the Emiri Diwan in Doha about whether or not Qatar still has a role to play in trying to bring peace to the conflict.
I've just had a little bit more from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and indeed the Defence Minister Israel Katz. If you're OK to hang on, Nicholas, for one more moment, it would be good to get your final thoughts on what is said. The Prime Minister says that he instructed all security agencies to prepare for the possibility of thwarting the leaders of Hamas. The Defence Minister fully supported this proposal. The statement goes on to say this afternoon, in light of an operational opportunity and in consultation with all heads of the defence establishment, with full backing, the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister decided to implement the instruction given last night to the IDF and Shin Bet, which did so in a precise and optimal manner. The Prime Minister and the Defence Minister believe that the action was completely justified in light of the fact that this Hamas leadership was the one who initiated and organised the October 7th massacre and has not stopped launching murderous actions against the State of Israel and its citizens since then, including taking responsibility for the murder of our citizens in yesterday's attack in Jerusalem. We have been speaking to former UK Ambassador to Iran, Nicholas Hopton. Just a final thought from you then on what the Prime Minister and Defence Minister had to say there.
Well, I think predictable in doubling down on justifying their action today, the military strikes on residences in Doha. But I don't think those statements really answer the big questions, is how does that account for, how is that justified under international law, violating the sovereignty of a state, and also trying to explain where the US stands in all this, which arguably is the most important question that will be analysed in the days to come, particularly as we go to the UN General Assembly in New York in the coming weeks, and where there's discussion about the future of a Palestinian state scheduled. So this is going to be in the focus for the next few days. And perhaps the most difficult questions to answer are actually now for the White House. So it'll be interesting to see what the White House spokesman has to say later on today to explain the US position on this, not least to their Qatari and other Arab allies who will wonder what kind of a security ally the United States is if it sides with Israeli action today, which has violated their sovereignty and put them under direct attack.
Indeed, and as you say, we will be hearing from the White House Press Secretary a little later, bringing that live to our viewers here on Sky News after 6 p.m. Former UK Ambassador to Iran, Nicholas Hopton, we really appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are just hearing that the US Embassy in Doha is now instructing its citizens that the shelter-in-place warning that was brought in earlier has been lifted and the security alert issued previously is no longer in effect. That coming from the US Embassy in Doha. Some other breaking news for you, not related to the Middle East. Back here in the UK, Kent Police are saying that they were made aware by the Coast Guard of an incident in the Channel involving a small boat just after 1 o'clock this afternoon. One woman was airlifted back to shore where she was pronounced dead. Officers are conducting inquiries to establish the circumstances surrounding the incident. So one person has died in a small boat incident in the Channel, according to the police in Kent. Back to our breaking news then in the Middle East. Our security defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark, is with us. Good to see you, Michael. An audacious operation by the Israelis. Just bring us up to speed, if you would, as to what we know about exactly what happened.
Well, it was a strike. It looks it was said to be carried out by the IDF, the Air Force, and Shin Bet, which is the intelligence organisation. The Prime Minister's office in Israel has talked about an opportunity arose. I think we should be sort of cautious about that one, because I'm sure that the Israelis would have had the targeting coordinates well established. They knew where the Hamas people were in Doha and in the Qatari district up in the northwest of the city. So they knew where they were coming and going to. They're watching them all the time. So I don't think this was a unique opportunity, as if it was a sudden window that opened up. They obviously chose to implement a plan which they would have had for a long time, probably many, many months, if they wanted to use it. So it looks like, to me, it looks like a couple of missile strikes from the Air Force. I mean, if we get more photographs in, you can sometimes see the missile coming down. If you've got enough different angles, you can actually see the missile. We haven't seen that so far.
No, we've only got the aftermath, haven't we?
Exactly.
At the moment,
yeah. Nobody was filming in that part of the city just before it hit. Although I wouldn't be surprised if some footage does emerge overnight.
CCTV
tends to.
Yeah.
But it looks to me like two explosions, and that would be normal in the sense that any attack normally uses two missiles. That guarantees a sort of 98% probability that you will hit exactly the target that you're going for. So it's usually two missiles are sent against a particular target, and that still represents usually a precision strike. Now, the Israelis are saying that they've killed some of the Hamas chiefs. In particular, they talk about Khaled al-Hayya, and they're saying that al-Hayya was one of the organisers of the 7th of October atrocity in 2023. I'm not sure about that, because what we know about the October 7th attack was that Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif in Gaza were the two real masterminds, and the rest of Hamas didn't know a whole lot about it because it was such a secret operation. They knew something was going on, but they didn't really know about the details of it. So the idea that Khaled al-Hayya was one of the key organisers, I find slightly difficult to understand. Nevertheless, he was at the top of the negotiating team of Hamas, and Hamas are a terrorist organisation, and the Israelis are at war with Hamas in ways that we understand. Whether or not we like the tactics, we understand that their motive for taking on Hamas as a terrorist organisation that they can't live with. So in that respect, they've hit a target. But this is not Tehran. I mean, Haniyeh, who was the previous, overall head of Hamas, he was assassinated last July when he went to the presidential inauguration in Tehran.
Oh, so interesting, because he lived in Qatar, didn't he?
Lived in Qatar.
So they chose not to touch him in Qatar.
No,
they waited until he left the country.
That's right. And that was the idea, that, look, if you live in Qatar, you're OK, because Qatar is a neutral state. It is a mediating state. It's where talks can go on that you can't really have in other ways. The Qataris are very good at establishing themselves as mediators between parties that would not enter the same room together. They hated each other so much. And Haniyeh lived for years in Qatar. And people used to criticise him for having a comfortable life in Doha while people were struggling in Gaza. He goes to Tehran in, I think it was July the 30th, 31st, last year, for the inauguration of President Pezeshkian of Iran, and the Israelis assassinate him there. Now, that was an audacious attack in Tehran, but it was in Iran, which is an enemy of Israel. This is an attack in Qatar, which is a friendly state. A lot of Israelis say, well, it's not that friendly because, look, there are links with the Muslim Brotherhood and so on. Nevertheless, in the international world, Qatar is a perfectly good,
well, they're certainly not firing rockets into Israel, are they?
Useful state, exactly. And so this has crossed a line, and the Israelis will justify it, of course. I mean, there is a justification for it in some respects, but it's an extrajudicial killing, right? So that here was a terrorist leader who the Israelis wanted to get. In theory, if they wanted to get him, they should have tried to arrest him, or they should have got the Qataris to arrest him, in theory. But, of course, they didn't even try that. They just killed him. So it's an extrajudicial killing of a terrorist leader in a completely neutral third country. And that is completely contrary to international law, as far as that matters these days to the Israelis. But it is extremely controversial now politically.
So why have they done it then now?
Well, in one respect, it's an instant retaliation for the bus attack yesterday in Jerusalem, and overnight, the Israelis recovered machine guns, which are these homemade machine guns, which are often made in places like Nablus and Ramallah in these workshops. And the Israelis were pretty clear, well, these are Palestinian Hamas people who did it. And then Hamas claimed responsibility only a few hours ago for the attack, and the Israelis hit them. I don't think Hamas's claim of responsibility actually was the trigger. I think the Israelis had already decided on this operation after the bus attack yesterday. But in one sense, it's immediate retaliation. But it's retaliation that also crosses a line. So politically, the Israelis are, as it were, taking the peace plan off the table. I mean, this Trump-led peace plan that looked reasonably optimistic on Sunday now looks as if it's just gone. You could say, well, this is Netanyahu, as it were, taking another peace plan out of the picture so he can carry on the war on all fronts, which is what he's doing. This question that the Americans were informed in advance and that Trump gave the green light to it, I'm sure the Americans were informed in advance, but I bet they weren't informed very far in advance. And the idea of Trump giving the green light to it, I find quite difficult to imagine, because he'd be green lighting something which puts his own project right onto the back burner, which actually undermines the peace plan that he was talking quite optimistically about, even on Sunday.
Yeah, Israel's Channel 12 saying that we shall wait and see when the White House press secretary speaks a little bit later, see if there's any clarity on that. Michael, as always, thank you. It's just gone 4:30. Let's remind you of our breaking news this afternoon. Israel has launched an attack on Hamas officials in the Qatar capital, Doha. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said Israel initiated it, Israel conducted it, and Israel takes full responsibility. Well, the strike took place in the Qatar district to the north of the city centre. The attack has been condemned by Qatar and by Saudi Arabia, as well as by the Secretary-General of the United Nations and other countries, including Turkey. Well, Israeli media has claimed that the US was notified and gave the green light for the attack. The Israeli military released this statement a short time ago. The IDF and ISA conducted a precise strike targeting the senior leadership of the Hamas terrorist organisation. For years, these members of the Hamas leadership have led the terrorist organisation's operations, are directly responsible for the brutal October the 7th massacre, and have been orchestrating and managing the war against the State of Israel. Prior to the strike, measures were taken in order to mitigate harm to civilians, including the use of precise munitions and additional intelligence. The IDF and ISA will continue to operate with determination in order to defeat the Hamas terrorist organisation responsible for the October the 7th massacre. Well, the US Embassy in Doha has said the US Embassy has instituted a shelter-in-place order for their facilities. US citizens are advised to shelter in place and monitor social media for updates. And in the last few moments, that shelter-in-place order has been lifted. Well, in the past hour, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres criticised the Israeli strikes.
We are just learning about the Israeli attacks in Qatar, a country that has been playing a very positive role to achieve a ceasefire and release of all hostages. I condemn this flagrant violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar. All parties must work towards achieving a permanent ceasefire, not destroying it.
In a moment, we'll speak to our US correspondent, Mark Stone. He's in Washington for us. But first, let's go live to Jerusalem and bring in our Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons. Adam, in the last few minutes, the Prime Minister of Israel, the Defence Minister as well, justifying the strike.
Yeah, that's right. Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel Katz saying that the people that they were targeted were held responsibility for the October 7th massacre, nearly 2 years ago, which of course was the precipitant for everything that has happened in Gaza, where more than 63,000 people have been killed. The October 7th killings, which will be commemorated in less than a month from now. are so fundamental to all of the decision-making and the justification for what is happening in Gaza and indeed the West Bank. But the other catalyst for this, according to Mr. Netanyahu, was what happened yesterday when two gunmen who'd come from villages in the West Bank, but not too far between Jerusalem and Ramallah, attacked a bus, killed 6 people, seriously injured some others, total injured about 21 people. And this morning, Hamas claimed responsibility for that attack. The 2 gunmen were killed at the scene. Now, we have no way, to be blunt, of knowing whether Hamas actually had any involvement in that attack whatsoever, but it took responsibility for that attack, for those killings. And it would seem that Mr. Netanyahu, last night, on the back of that attack, told the IDF to push forward with this attack. It wasn't something that was a spur of the moment. It had been planned for weeks, if not months. Something like this obviously takes a lot of doing, but Mr. Netanyahu felt that this was an operational possibility, that there was the right time to do it. And that involved airstrikes on Doha in order to try to kill members of the Hamas delegation. And we're hearing that it won't surprise you to know that the ceasefire negotiations have now been cancelled. It is hard to overstate, I think, just what a momentous act that is. Of course, not the first time that Israel has launched airstrikes on another country. It's attacked Iran, it's attacked Lebanon. Of course, it has repeatedly attacked Gaza recently. But Qatar is something completely different. I mean, this is a big geopolitical player. It hosted the World Cup, and it's home to an enormous American air base. And that will be an immediate question for many, will be, well, doesn't that mean the Americans know what's going in and what's going out of Qatari airspace? They knew in advance that this attack was happening. We assume that they gave the thumbs up to it, because otherwise surely they would have blocked it. My understanding is that Qatar was not told by Israel that this attack was happening, but it may be that the Americans passed on that message. Regardless, the simple fact remains that Israel has today launched airstrikes against another sovereign nation in this region and tried to kill people who were involved in negotiating a ceasefire in Gaza. That is a momentous thing to have happened. And it will have happened because Mr. Netanyahu has a certain element of impunity. He doesn't fear condemnation for the rest of the world. The only person he really fears is the American president, Donald Trump. And we await with great interest, I think, now to see whether Mr. Trump will give his approval, or whether he will be neutral, or whether he will condemn this attack. On those words, a great deal rests.
OK, Adam, thank you very much. Adam Parsons there in Jerusalem. And on that note, let's head straight to the White House. Join our US correspondent, Mark Stone. I mean, what will the president's response be, Mark? We know that his press secretary is going to do a live news briefing at 6 o'clock our time. What on earth will come out of it?
Well, I mean, who knows? I mean, honestly, this is one of those days where she is going to be fielding a huge number of different questions from domestic, the domestic orbit, but internationally as well. What we can tell you is that the Americans are saying that they were given notice by the Israelis that this attack was going to take place, but that the notice only came after the planes were in the air. Some reports saying after the missiles had been fired. So that means they had probably less than an hour, maybe much less notice than that. And what the American officials are saying is that means that they had no ability to influence what happens. Now, take a step back and look at Donald Trump's statements over many months now, where he has always said words to the effect of, Benjamin Netanyahu will do what he needs to do. That implicitly has been seen as a green light from America, from the Trump administration, to allow Israel to do what it needs to do, either within Gaza itself or potentially more broadly, as we've seen unfolding over the course of today. I've also been speaking to Qatari sources who have told me that, and this is a quote, despite conflicting media accounts, we are confident, the Qataris are confident, that this was a unilateral military strike conducted by Israeli forces without advance consultation of the United States. But to Adam's point, I mean, Al Udeid Air Base is the largest American air base in the Middle East, and it's in Qatar. And so it's certainly the case that as soon as those planes would have been in Qatari or even Saudi airspace next door to Qatar, the Americans would have been aware of their presence. So that was probably the point at which the Israelis notified the Americans that this was going to happen. But let's see either what Donald Trump says, and he's due to be in the Oval Office signing a presidential proclamation. We do not know what that will be about at 4 o'clock this afternoon, so 9 o'clock your time. But as you say, before that, we're going to hear from Caroline Levitt in the press briefing room. Stay tuned for that, because honestly, Jonathan, I think it'll be a blockbuster.
It really will. Mark, at the White House, thank you very much. Well, let's bring in the political analyst, Daniel Rubenstein, who served as an aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu between 2015 and 2020. Good to get you on the programme this afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us. Would you have advised the Prime Minister to take out this action?
I would have advised them to do it 2 years ago. This is what's happening right now in the Gaza Strip. The Hamas terrorist army is holding 20 Israeli hostages underground in tunnels where it is torturing them and starving them. Israel has been willing to pay a very high ransom to achieve the safe return of these hostages, but it was a very high ransom that Hamas was not willing to accept because it required Hamas to disarm and leave the Gaza Strip. These negotiations were being dragged out by Hamas, which refused to accept any reasonable proposal by Israel. President Trump warned Hamas again and again that this was the last warning. And the Qataris need to get the message also that we understand that they have not been a fair mediator. They have not been neutral. Qatar has been completely on the side of Hamas, essentially telling Hamas to keep the hostages.
You mentioned the hostages there. Let me just tell you what they've said in the last hour. The families of the hostages are following the developments in Doha with deep concern and heavy anxiety. A grave fear now hangs over the price that the hostages may pay. We know from the survivors who have returned that the revenge directed at the hostages is brutal. The chance of bringing them back now faces greater uncertainty than ever before. With one thing of absolute certainty, their time is running out. The hostages' families disagree with your assessment. They believe this will make things worse, not better.
I am horrified as well that any harm may come to the hostages. We have been in this situation for 2 years where Hamas has refused to release the hostages and Israel has made offer after offer. A high ransom payment is what Israel was willing to pay. Hamas was not willing to accept it. We are left with no other option but to go after the leaders of the Hamas terrorist organization who refused to budge and who celebrated on October 7th when these hostages were taken, when hostages were being taken from a music festival, from their homes. And the Qataris themselves were hosting Hamas leaders in Doha on that very moment. And Qatar did not condemn Hamas on October 7th. Qatar condemned Israel.
Well, surely rather than escalating the war, the answer is to try and continue the talks, isn't it?
The hostages are being held underground where they are being tortured and starved, while at the same time, the leaders of the Hamas terrorist army are saying that we're going to carry out more October 7th massacres until Israel is destroyed. It's a question of how much longer versus how much longer we can wait until the hostages die because they are being tortured and starved. We are at an impasse. Hamas remains in power of significant areas of the Gaza Strip. They have declared war on Israel. They have declared that they will keep fighting Israel until Israel is destroyed. And Israel's response is, no, we do not want to be destroyed. If you call for our destruction, if you carry out mass atrocities against us, it is you who will be destroyed.
Do you think Donald Trump knew about this in plenty of advance? Do you know any more detail about how much he knew and when he knew? We know there are reports on Israeli media this afternoon that he gave the green light. Is that correct?
I have seen the reports that President Trump gave Israel a green light. I have not seen anything confirmed. I'm still waiting to hear from the White House and from President Trump. I would assume that there was some kind of Israeli coordination with the Americans. We don't know if it was a green light, a yellow light, or no answer, but this is all an academic argument at this point. Israel has made very clear that the leaders of the Hamas terrorist army are not safe wherever they hide.
Middle East countries, indeed countries around the world, are queuing up to condemn this action by Israel. Do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu believes he can now act with impunity when it comes to this conflict?
I think Prime Minister Netanyahu weighs the pros and cons of every action that Israel takes. I think he has been very patient with the Hamas terrorist army that has delayed again and again any reasonable resolution to this war, which would see the Hamas terrorist army disarm and leave Gaza. I think the Prime Minister of Israel is doing what he feels is necessary for the survival and the well-being of his own country, which is not willing to live as neighbors with the Hamas death cult that is promising to kill us all.
Even to attack another nation's territory, a nation Israel is on somewhat friendlier terms with, a nation which isn't firing weapons into Israel and has no intention of doing so, and a nation which, whether you like it or not, whether those negotiations are going well or not, is at least being used as a base for talks in order to stop people dying.
Yes. These talks were going nowhere. Hamas continues to hold hostages underground where it is torturing and starving them. Israel has targeted the leaders of the Hamas terrorist organization, not the Qatari royal family, which has played a very negative role for the past 2 years, waging a massive information warfare campaign against Israel, trying to put Israel in the dock in every way, shape, and form, accusing Israel of the worst crimes against humanity. This is the same Qatar that is claiming to be a fair mediator. We know it is not a fair mediator. There's not much left to mediate. If whoever is in Gaza now, who is still holding hostages, wants to be in touch directly, I would advise that as the best path forward.
And as far as you're aware, as far as you know, the operation in Gaza City will continue, will be ramped up, will escalate. People there, innocent civilians, children, women who cannot leave Gaza City because they're either too ill or too weak or believe there is nowhere to go, then they could well get caught up in it. More deaths will happen. That's the price to pay, is it?
I would like 0 deaths to happen. Right now, Hamas remains in control of Gaza City, which is walking distance from the Israeli villages that Hamas attacked on October the 7th. A Hamas stronghold cannot be allowed to continue to exist next to Israel. That is why Israel is issuing warnings to the population of Gaza City that it is time to move south to safer areas away from Hamas's massive military infrastructure. The situation is very difficult in Gaza because the neighbor of Gaza, that would be Egypt, has refused to open its borders to people seeking a safer place during this war. It's a very difficult situation. Gaza is a densely populated area, and the Hamas terrorist army has chosen to fight from this densely populated area. So the choice was made by Hamas. Israel is responding to Hamas's choice by refusing to surrender to Hamas. We are not going to live alongside a death cult that is calling for our annihilation. We will make every effort possible to minimize harm to civilians while never giving up on the goal that the Hamas terrorist army cannot be allowed to continue to govern the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about people being able to move to safe areas. Every other day I speak to people in Gaza, to charities, to doctors, to people working for NGOs, and they all tell me there is nowhere safe in Gaza.
What's your question?
Well, my question is, it's just simply not true that there are safe places for people to go. We know that Al-Muazi has been hit by IDF missiles. We know people have been killed in these so-called safe humanitarian zones.
Yes, I want to emphasize the Israeli Defense Forces is urging people to move to safer areas. We understand that Gaza is not safe because Gaza has been turned into a massive military zone that Hamas has built a vast network of tunnels under. Hamas has RPGs, snipers, roadside bombs everywhere in Gaza. Israel has operated in some parts of Gaza, and those areas are being declared as safer than the current stronghold of Gaza City, where Hamas is declared to be the most dangerous place in Gaza. So we are urging civilians in Gaza City to move to safer areas. They would have much safer areas if Egypt would open its border crossing with the Gaza Strip and allow women and children to leave. We do not see any reason why women and children should be forced to stay in a war zone on behalf of Hamas. This is the choice that Hamas has made.
And would they be allowed to return?
Its own civilian population.
Sorry to push back on that. Sorry to push back on that, Daniel. But if they leave, if they're encouraged to leave, will they ever be allowed to return?
You've just moved the goalposts. We're talking about saving lives of people who are trapped in a war zone because Hamas is using them as a shield and as an effort to attack Israel. It's using its own population against Israel. So
And after the war, will they be allowed to return?
I hope so, yes. I think Gaza is the home of the people who live in Gaza. What we're hearing from so many people in Gaza is that Gaza is not their home and that they have the right to move to Israel in massive numbers and change its name to Palestine. This is their goal. This is why they celebrated on October 7th. No, I think the people of Gaza should be safe in Gaza.
Yeah, can you see a two-state solution? Is that something you would agree with?
I would like to see a future where there is something called two states for two peoples, where one of the states is the national home of the Jewish people, and another state could be the national home of the Palestinian people. Right now, we do not have Palestinians who are willing to accept the formulation I've just laid out. When Palestinians say they accept a two-state solution, it's essentially to say that my state is your state too, because we have the right to send 5 million of our own people into your state. So it's a two-state solution for them and not for Israel.
All right. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Daniel Rubinstein, former aide to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Michael Clark, our defence and security analyst, is still with us. As we approach 5 o'clock, Michael, just bring us up to speed as to where we are and what we know about these strikes and indeed who the target was and what has happened to them.
Yeah, I mean, 2 or 3 hours ago, Jonathan, a strike in the northern suburb of Qatar, in Qatar, which is just out of the city centre off the Corniche, a bit north of Corniche. And it looks like, we haven't got this confirmed, but it looks to me like 2 missiles. And the IDF said, the Israeli Defence Forces commended their Air Force and Shin Bet, the intelligence organisation, for locating the building where these Hamas officials were and targeting, I assume, one building, but 2 missiles on one building is what they would normally do to make sure that they get the target. Now, who was hit? It looks like 2 Hamas officials. The first one is Khalil al-Hayya, and the second one is Khalid Mashal. And Khalil al-Hayya is deputy chairman of the political bureau and was close to Yahya Sinwar, who was the assassinated head of Hamas in Gaza itself. Khalid Mashal, interestingly, has been in Doha for many years. He moved there from, I think, Syria over 10 years ago, so he's lived there a long time. And these are 2 of the 5-man governing council of Hamas. When Yahya Sinwar was assassinated, and Haniya, remember, who was used to living in Qatar and was assassinated when he went to Iran, the Hamas, in a sense, decided to replace these individuals with a council, because clearly every individual is being assassinated at some point. So that once they reached the top job, their days were numbered. So these are 2 of the 5-man council. So the Israelis have got them. Their connection to the 7th of October attacks is a bit more tenuous, but undoubtedly they're part of the negotiating team that was in Doha.
OK. Michael, for the moment, thank you very much. I know you're sticking around. We appreciate that. We have got on the line our world news presenter, Yalda Hakim. Yalda, I know you've spent a huge amount of time in Doha of late. You were there, of course, when President Trump did his big tour of the Middle East back in May. How things have changed since then?
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, this is quite a shocking moment. I think the first shock was when, during the 12-day Israel-Iran war, we saw airstrikes over the skies of Doha. And that, we know, was a coordinated strike. We later found out that the Iranians had coordinated that with the Americans. President Trump had confirmed that. But still, it was shocking given the number of American soldiers based in Doha, the relationship that the Americans have with the Qataris. So to see those missiles raining over the skies of Doha, given the way that the Qataris sell themselves as one of the safest places on the planet. Now, for this to happen in this moment, I frankly, given the contacts in Israel that I've spoken to, the Qataris I've spoken to, and other diplomats in the region, it's difficult to believe that despite Benjamin Netanyahu saying that this was done, completely by Israel, it was an Israeli operation, Israeli strikes, an Israeli decision. when you look at the statement issued by the US Embassy in Qatar, they're simply saying we've asked our staff at the embassy to seek shelter. We've asked Americans to seek shelter, and we're aware of the attack. They're not actually condemning the attack. We've seen condemnations coming from neighboring countries, from the Saudis, from the Egyptians, from the Emiratis. And let's not forget, the United Arab Emirates has an Abraham Accord that they have signed with the Israelis. They've normalized relations. In the last few days, they've said that there is the threat that the Abraham Accords could be facing some kind of threat if the West Bank, for example, was annexed. So to see now the Emiratis coming out in solidarity with the Qataris alongside the Saudis, the Qataris condemning the attack as a criminal attack on the sovereign state of Qatar, it really has jolted the region once again. But it will be interesting in the next few hours to see how Donald Trump reacts, to see what statements are coming out of the United States, because at this stage, it's hard to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu would have just unilaterally decided to do this without having consulted the United States.
OK, Yalda, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. That's Yalda Hakim, our World News presenter. You are watching Sky News. Our breaking news: Israel has launched a strike targeting Hamas leadership in Qatar today as they consider a US proposal for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The strike on the territory of a US ally, of course, does mark a huge escalation, as well as risking upending those talks aimed at winding down the war in the Gaza Strip and freeing hostages. Up to 20 of them believed to still be alive. Well, Qatar does host thousands of American troops, of course. It served as a key mediator as well between Israel and Hamas for several years now, even before the war. And Qatar has condemned what it refers to as a flagrant violation of all international laws and norms as smoke rises over the capital, as you can see there, Doha. Plenty more with me in the News Hour in a couple of minutes.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky Security and Defence Editor. Should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live.
Joins us live.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
It's 5 o'clock. I'm Jonathan Samuels. This is the News Hour. Our top stories. Explosions heard in the Qatari capital as Israel targets the senior leadership of Hamas. Sky News understands Hamas officials were meeting in Doha to discuss US proposals for a ceasefire. Qatar and the United Nations have condemned the strikes as a violation of sovereignty. We'll bring you all the latest developments and reaction. Another casualty of the migration crisis, a woman dies in an incident involving a small boat in the Channel. The White House denies Donald Trump wrote a birthday note to paedophile Jeffrey Epstein despite newly released files. And Nepal's Gen Z protests and how they forced the resignation of the country's Prime Minister. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin in the Middle East, where Israel has launched a multiple set of strikes on a building in Qatar's capital, Doha. They took place in the Qatar district to the north of the city centre. Israeli media has claimed the US was notified and gave the green light for the attack. But the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says his country initiated the strikes and takes full responsibility. Well, in a statement, the IDF confirmed that the IDF and ISA conducted a precise strike targeting the senior leadership of the Hamas terrorist organisation. For years, these members of the Hamas leadership have led the terrorist organisation's operations, are directly responsible for the brutal October the 7th massacre, and have been orchestrating and managing the war against the State of Israel. Prior to the strike, measures were taken in order to mitigate harm to civilians, including the use of precise munitions and additional intelligence. The IDF and ISA security service will continue to operate with determination in order to defeat the Hamas terrorist organisation responsible for the October 7th massacre. Well, the Qatari government condemned the attack as a flagrant violation of international law. And in the past hour, the Secretary-General of the United Nations insisted all parties should be working towards a permanent ceasefire.
We are just learning about the Israeli attacks in Qatar, a country that has been playing a very positive role to achieve a ceasefire and release of all hostages. I condemn this flagrant violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Qatar. All parties must work towards achieving a permanent ceasefire, not destroying it.
Well, in a moment, we'll be hearing from our US correspondent Mark Stone, who's in Washington for us. But first, to Sky's Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons. Adam, a hugely significant escalation in the situation in the Middle East. Why now?
Very good point. To your first line there, Jonathan, an enormous escalation. Something that I don't think anyone anticipated when they got up this morning. Was that the Israeli Air Force was going to be launching an airstrike against Qatar, a geopolitical heavyweight, the scene of negotiations around the future of Gaza, a country that, was hosting the World Cup pretty recently. And this is not an easy thing. It's actually further to fly from Tel Aviv to Doha than it is to fly to Tehran. So this is a difficult operation, long in the planning. Why today? Well, according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, this was precipitated by yesterday's attack by two gunmen on a bus just not that far from where I am in the northwest of Jerusalem that killed 6 and wounded many others, and for which Hamas claimed responsibility. But, of course, this operation has been long in the planning, and it looks like something they have prepared and wanted to get done. And we've just received this image, in fact, of the Prime Minister watching the attack being carried out. A long way. As I said, it's about 1,800 kilometres as the crow flies from Tel Aviv to Doha. We don't have the details of the planes involved, how many were involved, but this is not something you throw together in 5 minutes. But it was planned, and then they decided yesterday afternoon, I understand, that they would use that attack as the reason for the attack on the bus, as the reason for attacking Doha. Let me give you, by the way, a statement that we have had about this, and realising those things from the Israeli authorities. It says, yesterday, after the murderous attacks in Jerusalem and Gaza, where I should say 4 soldiers were killed, Prime Minister Netanyahu instructed all security agencies to prepare for the possibility of thwarting the leaders of Hamas. The Defence Minister fully supported the proposal. It goes on. The Prime Minister and the Defence Minister believe that the action was completely justified in light of the fact that this Hamas leadership was the one who initiated and organised the October 7th massacre and has not stopped launching murderous actions against the State of Israel and its citizens since then, including taking responsibility for the murder of our citizens in yesterday's attack in Jerusalem. So, a direct line being drawn between that bus attack and this attack on Hamas negotiators in Doha. But if we unpack this a little, is this an escalation? Without doubt. It is a momentous escalation. This is Israel attacking the territory of a sovereign state. It is them targeting people who are involved in negotiations for a ceasefire in Gaza, an area of land that Israel has, of course, been attacking ever since October the 7th, where it has killed 63,000 people. And let us not forget that 1,200 Israelis were killed on October the 7th, 250 taken hostage, and there are still 48 hostages left in Gaza, 28 of whom are believed to be dead, 20 are believed at the moment to be alive. There have been statements already from families of hostages condemning this attack, and in the case of one family saying that they fear that their son has been, quote, assassinated by Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying that they do not believe that their son will now be brought back alive. Because at the same time as this is happening, the Israeli military is preparing for a huge offensive on Gaza City. It has told the residents of Gaza City to leave now, but almost all have not. Over 1 million people in Gaza City, and probably only maybe 5%, potentially 10% have left. That leaves an enormous number. We've seen a series of high-rise buildings being destroyed there, and the expectation is that a major military offensive will start shortly, targeting Hamas leaders who are in Gaza City, Hamas fighters. Many, high number at least, of the hostages are believed to be in Gaza City, so that operation will tackle Hamas fighters and try to recover those. And also added into the mix, the West Bank, where members of the Israeli cabinet, notably Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, have been talking about annexing the West Bank, taking, let's say, 80% of it as Israeli territory. This is a nation that at the moment is fueled by the very strong, unapologetic rhetoric of some of its politicians, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, and has led us to this point. And the big question, which you will get into next with Mark, is the extent to which America has endorsed this. Our understanding is that America was told, Qatar was not told. We assume that the Americans, if they had wanted to, could have stopped this attack, but they didn't. And so the question now is what happens next? And will America continue to offer its unequivocal support to Israel even after this extraordinary attack on Qatar?
Adam, thank you. Adam Parsons there in Tel Aviv. Let's go straight to the White House. Join our US correspondent, Mark Stone. So, Mark, following on from that, is there any clarity as to what the White House knew and when?
Well, what I can tell you, first of all, I've just spoken to a senior Qatari diplomatic source here in Washington who has told me unequivocally that the Qataris were not made aware that this attack was going to take place. They did not know. I said, was Qatar informed? The response, not at all. Now, more than that, the Qataris say that they believe this was an entirely unilateral action by the Israelis. They are claiming that there was no advanced consultation with the United States. That said, two White House sources have told our partners at NBC News that the Americans were informed, but only after the Israeli planes, were in the air, and the Americans are saying they had no time to be able to influence what was about to happen. Now, remember that it's worth saying that the American president, has not commented yet on what has happened over the past few hours in Doha. But we can look at his language over many, many months now, where he has said kind of two things. He has said implicitly that Israel will do what it wants to do. He has used that phrase. He said Netanyahu will do what he needs to do in the context of Gaza and more broadly Israel's actions in the Middle East. But at the same time, the American president has also said he wants to see a ceasefire. Now, Israel's actions in Qatar today clearly fundamentally undermine that ceasefire. Indeed, the Qatari official I've been talking to said in pretty blunt terms, as has happened before, the Israelis undermined hopes for peace, further prolonging the war and complicating efforts to bring back the hostages. Now, that from the Qataris, from a country that has been the mediator in all of this for so many months, years in fact, is a punchy statement indeed. I think there's another thing to remember. Although we say, and looking at his language, Donald Trump appears to be kind of giving the green light to Netanyahu to do what he wants to do, that does not mean that he hasn't in the past become very irritated with the Israeli Prime Minister. He has said, I think it was in July when Israel broke the terms of a ceasefire with Iran, he said on the South Lawn, these two, Iran and Israel, don't know what the FUCK they're doing. He was extremely angry with the Israeli Prime Minister back then. So he has the capability to be angry. He also plainly has the capability to rein in Israel if he wants to. And so we will see what his press secretary says in about 45 minutes' time and what he says when he appears in the Oval Office at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah, we'll bring you that news conference with Caroline Levitt, as you say, at 6 o'clock live here on Sky News. Mark, thank you very much. Well, our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark, joins us now here in the studio. So just explain, if you could, and obviously we don't know everything, but where did this strike happen and who was hit?
Yeah, well, it looks as if it was in the north of Doha City, in the Qatar area, the suburb. It was obviously one of the residences or one of the buildings being used by the Hamas team. It looks as if, according to the Israelis, that they've targeted two of the five-man council that run Hamas these days, because all the individuals that we used to identify, Hania, who used to live in Qatar, who was the overall head, and Sinwar and Mohammed Deif in Gaza, who are the Gaza heads, they're all dead. And so the Hamas seems to have decided to replace the individuals with a five-man council, which obviously spreads their risks a little bit. And it looks as if they've got two of those five members, and probably the most senior two. So they have got Khalil al-Hayya, who is the deputy head of the political bureau, and is quite senior. He was quite close to Mohammed Sinwar. And they've also got Khalid Massoun, and he's been in Qatar for a long time, actually, but also he was a fixer. He was a sort of behind-the-scenes fixer. Whether they're the two most important, we don't really know, but they were certainly leading, or seems to be leading, the negotiation team. So killing these two people has certainly thrown the negotiations out of the window for the time being. And what has been being said by spokespeople and sympathetic journalists to the Israeli government is that these talks were dead. So we're going after Hamas because they're a terrorist group, which Israel has a right to do, in principle at least. But that these negotiations were going nowhere. The fact that President Trump said on Sunday that they were quite This was the last chance. They were quite optimistic, but then he sort of threatened Hamas to say, this is your last chance, be aware of it. And here we are with the shooting on the bus in Jerusalem yesterday, which seems to have been the stimulus for this attack today. And so the effect is to throw the current prospect of negotiations right out of the window for the time being.
And in terms of the wider region, Gulf states, the UN, plenty of others, all coming out to condemn this action. Yeah. The only person who we haven't heard from of huge significance is, of course, the President of the United States.
And, I mean, we've been debating all afternoon whether he knew much about this, because the initial briefing was that the Americans were told in advance. And my immediate comment was, I bet they weren't told very long in advance, because if they'd been told in advance and thought about it, I'm sure they'd have said no. But we'll see. But it looks as if they were just about told in advance. And we were also told that the President gave the green light to it. And I find that incomprehensible, because if he did give the green light to it, then he was actually throwing his own peace proposal out of the window. Had he decided by today that his peace proposal was going nowhere, I find that very hard to believe. But, I mean, that will become clearer. But you're absolutely right. So far, no other state has supported what Israel has done. No other organisation has supported. Everybody's come out in condemnation. But we haven't heard from the United States. And in the next 2 hours, we will get the first indications of how the US is going to react to this. But interestingly, I mean, usually if this sort of thing had been informed to the US in advance, congressional leaders would have known. Because any president, if they were told, they'd immediately get on to leaders of Congress, say, you better know about this, because you're going to have to talk about it. And none of them knew anything about it. None of them. So if the White House was told sometime in advance, it obviously kept it to itself. That in itself would be very, very unusual.
And just briefly, where do you think things go next?
Next, I think there'll be probably an escalation. I think the Israelis have now crossed a line in attacking a neutral country, and I think that they will go hell for leather now on other targeted individuals. I think they'll just take the brakes off with targeting Hamas leaders wherever they are, and they'll just live with the consequences. I think there's a sense in which they say, you know, we've already crossed a line now, we're doing what we need to do. For the hostages, for the Israeli hostages, 20 of whom are still believed to be alive, and probably 30 whose remains need to be recovered, this is very bad news indeed, as it's bad news for the hostage families.
And we've heard from them today, and of course their biggest fear is that there'll be retaliation against those hostages.
Quite likely.
In Gaza. Yeah, awful. Michael, as always, thank you. Let's get more reaction now. I'm joined now by Wael Azayat, former Middle East policy expert at the US State Department. Good to have you on the programme this evening. We do appreciate your time. First of all, what went through your mind when you first heard about these strikes?
Yeah, I mean, like other speakers, I was really shocked that the Israelis would do this on Qatari territory. Qatar is an important ally of the United States. It has the largest U.S. military air base in the Middle East, and obviously is viewed as a neutral ground for these negotiations between Israel and Hamas. So I was really shocked, surprised, but I guess at this point, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu feels completely unrestrained.
The talks we hear were going nowhere. We know on Sunday that President Trump said it was the last chance saloon, in effect, for Hamas when it comes to the ceasefire talks. And then, of course, this horrific shooting in Jerusalem yesterday. Do you think that was the catalyst, that attack, which left 6 people dead in Jerusalem, forced Israel's hand?
Well, it certainly may have, given a cover for the operation. But again, as other speakers mentioned, and I agree with them, an operation like this has been months in the planning and to make sure that it's executed. So this is something that I think the Israelis have been thinking about, planning for a long time. And I don't agree that the talks were dead. I mean, according to reports, at least from Hamas sources, that they have agreed in principles to the American proposal, just as they have in the past, to end the war and return the hostages. And so to me, really, this seems to be an effort by Netanyahu to extend the war and to put aside any hope for a negotiated agreement. It is an escalation that unfortunately is going to kill the diplomatic avenue for the time being.
And what more can you tell us about the president and his thinking? We're hearing slightly conflicting reports. Channel 12 in Israel saying that he gave this the green light, but we're also hearing that he perhaps only found out once the operation was underway. You've touched on this already briefly, but we are expecting to hear from the president's press secretary in the next 40 minutes or so. What do you think she will say to those reporters who will have many questions?
Yeah, I mean, as a former State Department official who worked on the Middle East, it's hard for me to imagine that no one in the U.S. government, certainly the intel community, knew nothing about this attack, whether the Israelis formally notified or not. I would also be surprised that they would not notify President Trump and his close advisors, at least pretty close to 0 hour here. What his spokesperson will say, I'm really not sure. I think there'll probably be some kind of acknowledgement that there was some consultations with the Americans, and that's going to really be difficult vis-a-vis not just the Qatari government, but other allies in the region, particularly the Saudis and the Emiratis. Those three countries are strategic partners of the United States. Trump was just in the region not too long ago promoting investments in the U.S. economy, massive investments in AI and other tech sectors in the U.S. That's all on the line, at least, momentarily right now. And so I don't know what his spokesperson will say aside than, the usual sticking by the Israelis, but I think it's going to come at a diplomatic, perhaps economic cost for the near future, at least.
And it would seem that Benjamin Netanyahu can act with impunity, even though the Gulf states are lining up, aren't they, to condemn this. The UN Secretary-General has condemned this. Prime ministers and presidents across Europe are condemning it. A lot of this is going to hinge on what the president says, isn't it? Because it could be that he's the only one actually backing it.
And I think if there's any justification for it, you'll see the president and his spokespeople go back to that this was a limited pinstrike focus on Hamas, who are, a terrorist organization, and look what happened in Jerusalem. And while a lot of elements of that are true, still what they really cannot hide is that Netanyahu and his government are completely unrestrained. They have carried out attacks and bombings now in multiple Arab or Muslim countries, if you count Iran as well, obviously. And there seems to be no end in sight, not just in Gaza, but to the region, a region that's trying to stabilize and move forward in places like Syria, for example, where the Israelis have carried out hundreds of bombings that are unprovoked. And so the perception in the region, and I think the broader international community, is that the Israeli government is uncontrollable, and it's still backed by the United States no matter what. That has to be addressed. Otherwise, unfortunately, this won't be the end of this.
OK, Wael Al-Zayat, former Middle East policy expert at the US State Department. We really appreciate your analysis this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And some more breaking news to bring you on the developing situation in the Middle East. Sky News understands that the son of Hamas leader Khalil al-Hayya has been killed in that attack on Doha. That coming into us in the last few moments. And, of course, we'll keep across the situation in the Middle East throughout the evening here on Sky News. And we are waiting for Caroline Levitt, the White House press secretary, to give her news briefing from the White House at 6 o'clock. We will bring you that live here on Sky News.